Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There is also a link in the description to my Patreon. It has Naruto fanfiction that cannot be posted on YouTube. There is some free content on there. So, you don't have to be a paying member to enjoy listening to excellent fanfiction. Chapter 31 Reassembled. There was a sun shower on the day before the third exam, raindrops mingling with the warm sunbeams pooling over Konoha streets. Most villagers had fled for cover when the drizzle began, but Sakura didn't mind it. After all, she was sheltered under Ichiraku's canopy with one of her closest friends. It was a good month then? Sakura asked her blonde, orange-clad teammate while he slurped away at his favorite food. Oh yeah. Jiraiya-sensei showed me a lot of things. Sakura raised her eyebrows at this. She wasn't so sure she wanted to know every detail of Naruto's adventure with the infamous pervert. Learn any new techniques? She asked, guiding their conversation to something appropriate for a public setting. Naruto turned to look at her, his blue eyes twinkling. I sure did, but I'm not telling you what they are yet. Trust me, you're gonna be impressed when you see them tomorrow, he gloated with a cheeky smile. What about you? How was your month? Good, she said, shrugging, while Naruto turned back to his steaming bowl of ramen to wolf down another mouthful. Busy, I guess. Sakura decided she would keep her recap sparse and positive because wiping the smile off of Naruto's face was the last thing she wanted to do, especially when she was so thrilled to finally see him again. She'd missed Team 7. Who'd you train with? A few people. I spent lots of time with the medical ninjas at the hospital, especially one named Shizune. But most of my training was with Tsunade-sama, who happens to be Jiraiya-sensei's former teammate. Naruto's face lit up. Yeah, I've heard about that lady. Jiraiya-sensei talked about her a lot. Apparently she's got the most gigantic. Sakura promptly shoved him out of his chair and continued as if she hadn't been interrupted. I also spent a few days with Kurenai-sensei and Hinata, she finished and folding her arms across her chest as Naruto scrambled back up. You know, he said, surprisingly not whining about being pushed, I'm happy with how the matches lined up. Haku's a cool guy but I still wouldn't mind kicking his ass. I'm relieved I don't have to fight Hinata-chan. Sakura nodded and observed her teammate out of the corner of her eye. He was gazing into his bowl with a faraway expression. I mean, I wouldn't have minded kicking Sasuke's ass too because sometimes he really deserves it. Sakura silently agreed with this. But I also want him to win. And you too, Sakura-chan. I want all of us to watch each other win our fights. We can do this, Sakura beamed, her heart clenching with some combination of excitement and nostalgia. She grasped Naruto's forearm and gave it a fond squeeze. He flushed a little at the gesture, but his usual spunk returned full swing. I think tomorrow is gonna be a really great day for us. I can feel it. There was no word from Kakashi or Sasuke for the duration of the month, which was both a little nerve-wracking and a little relieving for Sakura. The hyper-anxious part of her had speculated whether Orochimaru caught them while they journeyed across foreign lands, but the rational part of her doubted it. Kakashi was highly capable of keeping both of them safe and notifying the village well in advance if anything suspicious occurred. It's all right. Relax. Sasuke is fine. Just focus on your training. And that she did. As the days stretched on, Sakura fretted over Sasuke less and less and, for once, dedicated most of her energy to her own health and safety. Before meeting Naruto for ramen, in fact, while Sakura was changing from her scrubs to a casual outfit, she realized that her body was the healthiest she'd ever seen it in this life. She'd managed to sleep properly for the majority of the month and not once had she been pulled to the future. An overly optimistic side of her wanted to believe that her extra defenses on the time travel scroll were helping mend it somehow. Now her face was full of color again, the dark circles gone from beneath her eyes, and her calves and arms covered in firm, lean muscles. You're glowing these days, forehead, Aino commented a few weeks prior while she trimmed the ends of Sakura's hair, which had grown out past her shoulders. They were in a private room of the hospital because, despite Ino's immense progress in her recovery, the medical personnel still wanted her under their surveillance as much as possible. But at least now she had her own space. Sakura smirked but kept her head trained forward, as not to screw up her haircut. You know what would make me feel even better? If you let me have a go at the herb collection in your shop. Ino let out an exasperated sigh. I would, but I've already been out today. You know that. The hospital curfew bullshit is the worst. They might make an exception if I escort you, Sakura said. And she didn't doubt it. As if she wasn't already famous enough before the Chunin exams, word of her training with the legendary Tsunade Senju has spread like wildfire. Not only was she now deemed a medical ninja elitist but a budding media sensation. Ino shrugged, pacing around to Sakura's front side, running her fingertips through the damp, freshly chopped hair to make sure the ends were straight. I guess so, she said. Alright, fine. But only because it's your birthday. And we'd better not be out too late. I'll lose my mind if I have to listen to another screechy lecture from my stupid nurse. Or my father. Worrywart, Sakura teased. Ino had been more risk-averse since the second exam, but Sakura figured that close encounters with death could do that to people. Ino rolled her eyes. Stuff it, billboard brow. And stop talking or I might chop off more hair than you want me to. The two of them spent the afternoon raiding the flower shop supplies Sakura for ingredients and poisons and Ino for something bright to liven up her hospital room. Then Ino treated Sakura to a hot beverage of her choice at a nearby tea shop before Sakura went home for a small celebration with her parents for progressing through her young teenage years. Again. She spent a large portion of her time training with Tsunade, and despite the Sannin claiming that she would stick around for only a few extra days, she ended up staying for the entire month, to Sakura's great pleasure. She wasn't sure if this was a result of Tsunade enjoying the time they spent together or poking around at the hospital, or if she was growing attached to some of Konoha's finer pubs. Rumor had it she'd spent a night or two catching up with Jiraiya when he caught a break-in between training Naruto. So, are you going to watch the third exam matches, then? Sakura asked one day from where she was splayed out in the grass of a training ground, exhausted and dripping with sweat after a taijutsu lesson in the scorching heat. Tsunade shrugged, sipping from her flask what she claimed was water. Might as well, she answered, and Sakura's heart leapt. After all the things I've taught you, you'd better put on a good show. She probably would too, despite her opponent being a powerhouse in his own right. 5 whole weeks with Tsunade was plenty of time for Sakura to sharpen her skills and even add to her repertoire of techniques. Inevitably, they'd discussed performing creation rebirth. They went over the hand seals, studied what exactly it did to the user's body, and speculated on the best time to use it. Of course they didn't practice the jutsu, because doing so would shorten Sakura's lifespan, and without real reason to. Tsunade also helped Sakura master smoothly transferring her chakra into others, either to replenish or amplify their own chakra levels. Although she'd done it on purpose to keep Sasuke awake all night, the time Sakura transferred her chakra to him in the second exam had, unquestioningly, caused him some discomfort. Tsunade had a few tricks up her sleeve to mitigate that. Your chakra has to join your target's chakra circulation seamlessly. Get a feel for the rhythm and pace of their chakra and match it. Don't interfere with the flow of things, she explained to Sakura in the hospital's research facility at some point mid-month. Sakura, who normally focused on merely getting the chakra in her patients rather than the therapeutic benefits of soothing chakra transmission, practiced this and mastered it in 2 days. It was an art, really, but Sakura had the knowledge and talent to catch on quickly. Sakura's favorite new technique she learned from Tsunade was body pathway derangement, which was a technique that scrambled the electrical signals transmitted between a person's brain and body. In other words, it could disrupt an opponent's ability to control their body. Tsunade was hesitant about teaching Sakura the technique at first. It's helpful to have an affinity for the lightning element with this one, she said, pursing her red lips. It makes it easier for you to tamper with the electrical nature of neurotransmission. That didn't stop Sakura in the slightest though. I'll just find my own way to interfere with it then, she said confidently, not deterred. Just show me how to get my chakra into their head and I'll take it from there. All right then, Tsunade replied with a smirk, seemingly moved by Sakura's determination. It's particularly difficult to counter a technique that attacks the brain. By the sound of things, this Kabuto fellow, if he really knows as much about the medical arts as you say he does, might be able to. But this trick should at least give you an opening. Their bond seemed to grow throughout the month, and Sakura was certain that the Sannin was less aggressive and drunk by the end of it. She was also immensely thankful that Tsunade never asked about or even batted an eye over how her new student was so familiar with her quirks, hobbies, and abilities. In a way, it felt like their relationship had picked up where it left off, except there was a little more distance between them. Tsunade rarely directly helped patients, and she was forced to polish off sake bottles without Sakura's help when they stopped for breaks in between lessons. Otherwise, Sakura trained with Hinata a few times, who she'd run into by coincidence on the way to the training grounds, and, by extension, Kurenai, who was Hinata's sensei. At first these sessions were relatively non-combative, since there was a chance Hinata and Sakura might face each other at some point in the tournament. So it was mainly target practice and chakra endurance exercises, which was quite a refreshing break in between training with the ruthless Sannin. But then Sakura discovered something that changed the course of her training for the rest of the month. With the help of Shizune and some of the more advanced hospital staff, samples of Orochimaru's disease and detailed records of all patient outcomes were gathered. Thankfully, there were only a handful of new cases over the month, providing just enough fresh material to study in depth. It had become a community effort to keep Konoha's citizens, both ninjas and civilians alike, as healthy as possible. Even Haku brought ointments to alleviate symptoms back from the land of waves when he returned from training there. Konoha was in the spotlight for the Chunin exams now, which had, inevitably, garnered international awareness for the mysterious outbreak. And for Sakura. Shizune. Come have a look at this, Sakura called while she analyzed brain scans in a lab attached to the radiology wing. It was hard to believe that just before the Chunin exams, she and Sasuke had to break into the hospital to enter it. Tsunade was there too, arms folded and monitoring the investigation with a curious eye, without saying much. Only the three of them were there. Sakura noticed that the chakra around the brain was depressed, especially in patients who were just starting to show symptoms. That could mean a lot of things, Shizune said quietly, running her thumb and forefinger along her chin. Yeah, I know, Sakura said. One possibility is, being trapped in a genjutsu. Shizune stepped back. I'm not so sure. It's worth considering, Tsunade piped up, nearly causing Sakura to jump. If this is Orochimaru we're up against, it would be wise of us not to rule anything out. Sakura agreed, grateful, and immediately after, approached Kurenai, an expert in the field of genjutsu, requesting private lessons. Kurenai obliged. No groundbreaking discoveries were made regarding the illness, but they did learn that it had a dormant, asymptomatic phase of some sort, though how long this phase lasted was unclear. It progressed faster in civilians, some victims had gaping puncture wounds, and there was an unusually large outbreak among civilians a few days before the third exam. So there was still plenty to puzzle over. There were no signs of Orochimaru or Kabuto either, so who knew what they were plotting? Early evening on the night before the third exam, a few hours after parting ways with Naruto, Sakura took a stroll in a field on Konoha's outskirts, just past the training grounds. The rain was gone but left behind thick, humid air that promised better weather to come. Sakura twirled 3 freshly purchased daffodils in her fingers and kicked off her sandals, feeling the soft, long grass press against her feet and tickle her calves. She'd been so caught up in her training and medical duties that she hadn't processed how nervous she ought to be for the following day. Was there still a war coming? Would sand and sound attack them again? Sakura had shared her concerns with Tsunade because she had to tell someone, but the Sannin merely assured Sakura that no matter what problems cropped up, there wasn't anything that anyone could do about them now. Just focus on one thing at a time. We'll deal with the shit when it happens. Trying to get in Orochimaru's head is impossible and definitely not a place you want to be, anyways. Sakura put her faith in her mentor that they would somehow deal with problems as they occurred, but that didn't stop her from spending countless late nights in Konoha's library memorizing everything she could about sand and sound politics. A warm, early summer breeze tugged at Sakura's neatly trimmed hair as she sheltered her eyes from the bright, lowering sun. She'd also spent a surprisingly short amount of time thinking about Sasuke, probably because she knew it would only cause her anxiety. She felt a little embarrassed over the fiasco she caused in his apartment while he was gone, namely, her breaking into it, twice, and so she had purposefully avoided the Uchiha compound since. Well, whether or not she was prepared for it, she would face him tomorrow and find out what exactly was the status of their relationship. She felt both guilty and terrified of getting her feelings squashed again, but, above all, she missed the comfort she felt in his presence and how he always read her like a book when she needed him to. And she prayed they could salvage that connection, somehow, even though, as the Sasuke of her nightmares had reminded her, loving him is dangerous. Sakura didn't care though. She was a stronger person now. Spending so much time with Tsunade ended up being just the motivational boost she needed. Whatever was meant to happen would. She laid the daffodils down on Rock Lee's grave and turned on her heel to fetch her sandals. Despite her best efforts, Sakura had a relatively restless sleep. It was much harder to escape her plaguing anticipatory thoughts in the privacy of her silent bedroom, especially now that she never really felt safe in it. But she still woke up hyper-alert and ready to go, her nerves spurring her straight out of bed in an anxious frenzy. The third exam began in the morning because the organizers wanted to take advantage of as much sunlight as possible. Depending on how they played out, the matches could last an entire day, or longer. Thankfully the morning brought with it clear skies and a comfortable heat, the rain clouds long gone. Sakura arrived at the arena with plenty of time to spare, her emotions heightening as she neared the gigantic structure. Today was the day everything in her life so far boiled down to. First, it was her chance to fight at full force, make Tsunade proud, and squash one of her most loathsome enemies. Second, it was her chance to impress the examiners, advance to Chunin, and be rightfully promoted to the hospital's governing council. Third, it was her chance to gauge the status of her relationship with Sasuke, if they even had one at all now. And finally, it was time to test just how much she'd managed to change the course of history in this world. If Orochimaru didn't wage war on Konoha today, that meant Sakura had, somehow, managed to prevent it. When she reached the main gates, Sakura fell in step with the line of spectators who were beginning to trickle in, undoubtedly hoping to secure the best seats in the house. The stadium was as vast and looming as she remembered it, with the capacity for thousands to fill its seats. It was surprisingly already about a quarter full when she got there, so she figured she'd better hurry along to the designated platform where competitors were to watch from. "Excuse me," she mumbled, keeping her head low while she zigzagged through the growing crowd, struggling to keep her bearings in the throng. She managed to shuffle through to the intersection where competitors were meant to veer away from the rest, but she paused there because something caught her attention. Along the very top of the stadium, behind the uppermost row of seats, the Hokage and Kazekage were strolling towards their designated section in the center of the arena, flanked by bodyguards. Sakura scuttled forwards to get a better view of the two delegates, craning her neck and straining her eyes. Last time around, Orochimaru had arrived at the third exam disguised as the fourth Kazekage, and if her memory served her correctly, he'd covered most of his face with a white sheet of fabric to hide his identity. She needed to check, did he use this disguise again? It didn't take long for her to confirm that, no, he didn't. Raza, the real fourth Kazekage, who Sakura had read extensively about during her preparatory research of sand politics, was definitely there with his face entirely unmasked. He's not dead. Gaara's father isn't dead, Sakura thought, her heart pounding from a combination of elation over having, somehow, saved the fourth Kazekage's life, and sheer panic, because she now had no way of anticipating Orochimaru's next move. That was when a shrill scream met her ears. Without a moment's hesitation, Sakura pulled a kunai from her weapon pouch and spun around, preparing to lash out at any threat and praying beyond hope that it wasn't Orochimaru. "It's her! It's her!" someone cried. Poof! A bright light eclipsed her vision. Sakura froze, holding the knife in front of her with eyes open wide like a deer in the headlights, while other flashes temporarily blinded her. After several seconds of rapid blinking, she managed to reorient herself and process that a rather large crowd had gathered around. Among them were several people with cameras and notepads. Sakura Haruno. Do you remember me? One man's voice rang over the others. She glanced at the balding man who had spoken and slowly lowered the kunai. Yes, she croaked, finding her voice, still a little shell-shocked by the camera flashes. You're from the land of waves. You healed my leg and cured my daughter of pneumonia. Dear, come have a look, the pink medic is here. Sakura felt a rush of warmth as she began to recognize more and more faces from the village. Team 7 had completed their first C-ranked mission in. There had to be at least 30 Land of Waves citizens of all ages, shapes, and sizes gathered around. We're here to cheer for you. A young girl piped up with a toothy grin. Sakura opened her mouth to answer, but was interrupted by one of the people holding a notepad, who stepped forward, blocking the girl from Sakura's vision. Miss Haruno, he said curtly. How does it feel to skip the preliminary round and advance directly to the third exam? She blanched. She started, but then another person with a notepad, along with a camera crew, stepped even closer. How did you train this month? Is it true that you spent the month with one of the legendary Sannin? More chimed in. Why do you have the same mark on your foreheads? Where's your boyfriend? It felt like her tongue was twisted in a knot. Journalists? Sakura certainly wasn't used to this kind of treatment. And she sure wasn't prepared to answer their questions coherently, with her nerves currently in overdrive. If any of them rubbed her the wrong way, she wasn't sure what she'd do. Sakura raised her hands in surrender and started backing away, but the journalists continued their advance, snapping pictures and calling her name. And the crowd only grew larger and larger, curious passers-by joining in to see what the fuss was about. All right, that's enough. Thank God, Sakura thought as a new presence crept up from behind her, relieved for a distraction or an out from being trapped in the spotlight. But when her eyes landed on the newcomer, her relief dissipated in a flash. It was Kabuto. Give Sakura-chan some space. She has a big day ahead of her, he drawled in that velvety tone of his. And then, to her horror, he placed a hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off immediately and cast him a furious glare. Sakura-chan? I think I'm gonna barf. He glanced back to her, the sun catching the surface of his round glasses, obscuring his eyes from view. We should join the other participants now, he said calmly, ignoring her obvious discomfort at their proximity. Come on. That's exactly where I'm heading, Sakura shot back, ignoring the anxious murmurs around them about how too soon-to-be opponents might square off sooner than anticipated. She shouldered her way past the repulsive snake and took the stairs leading to the raised platform 2 at a time, wanting to increase the distance between them as fast as possible. It was a shame she didn't have a chance to interact much with the Land of Waves villagers, but there was no way she was staying there with a horde of journalists and Kabuto hanging around. She glanced over her shoulder when she arrived at the top of the staircase to find that he was following her up, so she quickly spun back around and beelined down the relatively crowded platform. Competitors, as well as their teammates and sensei, were grouped along the narrow, concrete path. The platform was situated at the base of the stands, only separated from the arena below by a handrail, giving them true front-row seats. Sakura, who was now feeling quite unsettled and jumpy after that recent encounter, scanned the bunch of them for familiar faces while she pushed ahead. She passed Gaara and his teammates, who were lingering at the end of the path by the stairs. Gaara was quiet and still, as usual, with his arms folded as he gazed out at the filling stands on the opposite side. Kankuro was awkwardly hunched against the rail, seemingly clinging to it for support, while Temari patted his back. And their sensei was staring directly at Sakura. Sakura turned away and kept her head low while she sidestepped them, feeling Gaara's sensei's eyes trained on her the entire time. Are they up to something? Are they in on one of Orochimaru's schemes this time around? She thought, biting her lip and trying to keep herself from hyperventilating. but then she remembered Tsunade's advice. We'll deal with the shit when it happens. And that made her feel the slightest bit better. It turned out Naruto was already there, further along the platform chatting with teammate. Hinata and Shino were both suited up for combat. Kiba, the only member of their team who hadn't advanced past the preliminaries, looked comfortable in his hoodie and with Akamaru curled up in his arms. Naruto. Sakura called, feeling bubbly at the sight of her friend. Sakura-chan. Finally. He answered and jogging over to meet her. Kurenai shot Sakura a friendly smile and she returned it. Their bond had undoubtedly grown throughout their Genjutsu training. It was getting kind of lonely being the only one from Team 7 here. Kakashi and Sasuke haven't returned yet, huh? She asked, not entirely surprised, but also a little disappointed. As much as she was dreading her reunion with Sasuke, she desperately wanted to see him back in the village in one piece. And find out whether he hated her. As for Kakashi, it had been well over a month since they'd last spoken. No, they haven't, Naruto grumbled, frowning and folding his arms. They'd better not miss my fight. Sakura shrugged. I'm sure they'll be here soon, she said, but not really believing the words. Because, knowing Kakashi's classic tardiness, it would be a surprise if they showed up much earlier than Sasuke's match, which took place right after Naruto's. The stands filled rapidly from there on out, and were more packed than she ever remembered them being in her previous life. The land of wave spectators were grouped together somewhere behind them. Sakura could tell because she heard a few of their familiar voices screaming her name, and she spotted a fairly large crowd of medical personnel, including Ayame and Shizune, on the opposite side, probably also there to root for her. Tsunade and Jiraiya, who were a hard pair to miss, were seated higher up, close to where the Hokage, Kazekage, and Konoha's High Council members were assembled. Team 10 showed up a short while later, and Sakura was pleased to find Ino among them, wearing civilian clothes. Despite her face being a little pale and sunken, she looked better than Sakura had seen her since she was infected. Now that Ino appeared to be in remission, the doctors allowed her to leave the hospital for longer and longer spans of time. They briefly caught eyes and exchanged smirks. When everyone seemed to be settled in and the crowd's volume waned in anticipation, Hayate, who was still alive Sakura noted, walked into the empty arena, which triggered a new wave of cheering, and turned his attention towards the competitors' platform. Is everyone here and ready to go? He called, his voice amplified by a tiny microphone clipped onto his Jonin vest. No. Naruto yelled back, certainly not needing a microphone to make his voice heard. Sasuke isn't here yet. Loud muttering swept through the stands. Sakura twisted around to observe the sea of faces behind her, most of which appeared worried or frustrated. Watching the Uchiha air fight was, without question, one of the biggest attractions of this entire tournament. It would be quite a letdown if he didn't show. Hayate nodded but didn't seem too fazed. Sasuke Uchiha doesn't fight until the fourth match, so there's no cause for concern, yet. Let's get on with the show. He proceeded to call Temari and Shino down into the arena, and the crowd's buzzing and whooping picked up in volume once more. The third exam commenced. The first match was an extremely close one that kept everyone on their toes and excited for more. Temari managed to win it, but barely, her wind release techniques wreaking havoc on Shino's army of bugs. Despite the slight air of disappointment over Konoha's first competitor losing the match, Sakura got the sense that the audience didn't mind Temari winning it. She was strategic, beautiful and, all in all, extremely entertaining to watch. Wind users like her weren't terribly common in Fire Country. Sasuke and Kakashi still hadn't arrived by the time Hinata and Kankuro were in the arena. Sakura was feeling a little anxious over it, but Naruto's attention was diverted enough for him to temporarily forget his worries. She's going to win. I know it, Naruto chanted, clinging tightly to the rail and teetering against the edge, looking down at the young Hyuga heiress. And, a little surprisingly, he was right. It was a long, exhausting fight, but a show-stopping one nonetheless. Hinata was undeniably the underdog between the two, despite her famous name. She was significantly smaller than Kankuro, who was older and held himself with a confidence that sharply contrasted her generally timid stance. But she beat him. Hinata beat him. It was another narrow win, where, when Kankuro tried to fool her with his puppet's disguise, Hinata's all-seeing eyes were not deceived. She attacked the real Kankuro, striking an incapacitating chakra point and temporarily paralyzing him. It was a very proud moment for spectators from Konoha, which made up the majority of the crowd, and probably for the Hyuga clan as well. Sakura screamed with the rest of the crowd, punching a celebratory fist in the air, and wondered if Naruto would have any voice left for his own fight, which was to take place next. As soon as the fight ended, he leaped clean off the platform to congratulate her. But all of that to say, Sakura couldn't help but notice that Kankuro didn't seem like himself during the fight. He was taunting and ruthless, loud enough for the audience to hear, and, overall, much meaner than Sakura thought he was capable of being. And his movements seemed rather sloppy. But perhaps that was only a trick of her imagination. Sakura wasn't exactly in the calmest, clear-minded state. Then Hinata and Kankuro, both of whom sustained numerous injuries, received medical examinations from the nurses on site. Naruto, Kiba, and the others who entered the arena after the match, returned to their designated spots on the platform. Sakura would have offered to help the medical personnel on the field, but none of Hinata's injuries seemed terribly life-threatening, and also, she needed to conserve her own chakra for her fast-approaching fight. People were talking about the fight for a long while, greatly extending the gap between the second and third matches. Naruto, who was next to Sakura again, and who was normally expressively impatient when his chance to fight an opponent was put off, seemed content with basking in the positive attention Hinata was getting. Several minutes later, however, just as the buzz over the recent, exiting match began to fizzle out, a new wave of chatter swept across the stadium, seemingly out of nowhere. Sakura and Naruto's heads snapped up with surprise and they scanned the grounds intently in search of what everyone was making a fuss over. Shit. Please don't be an attack, was Sakura's first thought, her heart rate increasing and muscles tensing in preparation to move quickly. But the spectators didn't seem afraid at all, and the collective oaths and squeals indicated that this wasn't about a threat. Their eyes were trained on the participants' platform, further along it, near the end by the stairs. The first thing Sakura caught sight of when she craned her neck in that direction was Kakashi's mop of gray hair and his army green jonin vest. Her stomach flipped. He was always an easy one to spot, with his authoritative air and crackling chakra signature, no matter how much he typically preferred to stay out of the spotlight. His hands were shoved leisurely in his pockets, his visible eyebrow arched, and his pace slow and easy. A classic stance for Sakura's sensei. Sasuke, on the other hand, was barely recognizable. He was wearing dark colors. That was the first change Sakura spotted from her position far away along the platform. Her eyes flitted across his unfamiliar clothing, a sleeveless black top with a trademark wide, high collar, black sleeves covering his forearms, heavy, dark gray combat pants that tapered in mid-calf where they met the top of tall, black sandals, a thick belt wrapped around his waist, and… Wait. Was that a sword and sheath fastened to it? His presence caused the audience to rouse hysterically, maybe because he'd actually made it for his match in time, maybe because his chakra signature seemed more potent and intimidating than it usually did, or maybe simply because he looked incredible in that new outfit with his biceps out on full display. Either way, there sure was a stir, especially among the females there. Sakura felt her throat constrict. Sasuke hadn't noticed her or Naruto yet and was mumbling something to Kakashi while keeping his eyes trained on the ground ahead of him. His expression was blank but peaceful somehow. He seemed well rested and generally content, no furrowed eyebrows, no hunched shoulders, and no signature frown. That irked Sakura a little. Because maybe being away from her was less stressful for him. That wouldn't surprise me, actually, Sakura thought with a stab of hurt. I'm a whirlwind of problems. How I feel must be toxic. She suddenly had a powerful urge to run. Is that you, bastard? Shut up, Naruto. Sakura inwardly groaned. She turned away and glanced around the arena, looking anywhere but at her reassembling team. Hinata and the medical personnel were starting to clear out of the arena, so there wasn't a whole lot to see down there. So Sakura looked out at the audience on the other side instead, but couldn't keep her stomach from turning, her pulse from ringing in her ears, or her mind from wandering. If Sasuke's mere appearance could get her worked up like this, she needed to avoid interacting with him before her fight lest it throw her off her game. There was no amount of training in the ninja arts that could prepare her for this dreaded reunion. You. Stay away from me. Sakura's stomach flipped again as Sasuke's earlier words echoed in her skull. At the time, she'd been so overwhelmed by her other problems, with Lee's death, Kabuto's break-in, and Ino's contraction of the disease having been at the forefront of her mind. But now that she had a moment to think about it, those words really stung. Because all she was trying to do, by telling Sasuke about the massacre, was save him from his revenge. To make his life better. Their lives better. But instead, she might have wound up getting herself shut out of his entirely. Yo! Sakura nearly toppled over the railing when a hand ruffled her hair, her fingers itching for a kunai in her weapon pouch. A familiar laugh met her ears. Well, aren't you jumpy today, huh? Kakashi chuckled. Kakashi-sensei. You're finally back. Naruto bellowed and diving straight at his teacher with his arms spread open wide. Kakashi managed to evade the friendly assault and shove his blonde student towards Sasuke instead. Naruto was so happy that he didn't seem to mind. Sakura wondered whether he'd actually hug Sasuke and risk getting a black eye before his fight. But, thankfully, he merely slapped the Uchiha on the back instead. Sakura willed herself to face the newcomers. Welcome back, she said while forcing a smile, directing her gaze at her sensei. She was feeling uncharacteristically shy and nervous in Sasuke's presence. It's great to see you again, Sakura, Kakashi replied. So, what did we miss? Thankfully, Naruto went ahead and answered for her, describing the previous 2 matches in vivid detail. Sasuke didn't really say anything, aside from offering the odd grunt or smirk, but that was normal for him. And then out of nowhere, Naruto was saying animatedly, waving his arms around for dramatic effect, when he was interrupted by Hayate's resounding voice. Naruto Uzumaki and Hakuyuki, please make your ways down to the arena for the 3rd match. For a split second, Naruto froze, but then realization crossed his features and he broke out into a humongous grin. Yeah. Time to kick some ass. He cried and preparing to leap down into the arena again, disregarding how competitors were expected to descend the stairs and ceremoniously enter it through a tunnel. Good luck, Sasuke said, and Sakura was honestly surprised that these were the first words to come out of his mouth. You can do it, Naruto. She agreed, and patting him on the arm before he sprang off the platform. Kakashi just smiled. Naruto confidently waved up at the crowd as he waited for Haku to join him down there, while Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi looked on, Kakashi positioned between, but slightly behind, his students. Sakura daringly cast a fleeting, sideways glance at Sasuke because she really couldn't resist. Unfortunately, he decided to do the same thing at the exact same time. Damn it. Sakura froze for a moment and swallowed a lump in her throat while the 2 of them just stared at each other. Sasuke really did seem well. In fact, from this close-up, he was practically glowing. Deciding that it was too late to look away now, Sakura quietly asked, "Good month?" Before wrenching her eyes back down towards where a maskless Haku was striding out of the tunnel, wearing an assortment of blues and his Kirigakure head protector. The land of wave spectators were actually cheering quite loudly. An interesting month, Sasuke answered, and Sakura could hear the smirk in his voice. Indeed it was, Kakashi agreed, and she suspected that they were making a reference to something she didn't know about. That unsettled her a bit, but she was also feeling a tad giddy over how Sasuke didn't seem to openly despise her. At least in public. And yours? I noticed you managed to keep your old friend around for the entire month after I dropped her off. On cue, there was a distant, collective whoa. Somewhere in the stands across the way. Sakura, Kakashi, and Sasuke's eyes followed the sound to where Tsunade was stumbling through the stands to her seat, knocking other people clean out of their own. One sleeve of her blouse was slipping down her shoulder and she had a full wine bottle in each hand. She was also yelling, accusing the people around her of getting in her way. "That's Tsunade?" Sasuke asked, and he sounded genuinely surprised. "She's here?" "She is," Sakura said, and it was her turn to smirk. "Alright," Hayate called out then. "Naruto Uzumaki and Haku Yuki, please step forward. Let the third match begin." Chapter 32 Thin Ice. A hush fell over the arena, besides the occasional anxious murmur and encouraging shout. "Do you know what Naruto's been up to for the past month?" Kakashi, who was positioned behind his students, asked quietly while folding his arms over his army green jonin vest. Naruto and Haku were now circling each other and exchanging taunting remarks. "He has been training with Jiraiya-sama," Sakura explained, noting how said legendary Sannin was currently beckoning for her own mentor to take her seat beside him. "Apparently Naruto has a few new tricks up his sleeve, but he wouldn't tell me what they are." Kakashi nodded. "I wouldn't doubt it," he said. "Haku will be a tough opponent for Naruto either way," Sasuke chipped in. Sakura's stomach twisted at the sound of his voice. Despite how relieved she felt over him not outwardly despising her, she couldn't understand how he managed to seem so calm and normal while there were so many things left unsaid between them. His strengths are in his defenses and speed. Naruto needs to be smart or he'll get his ass kicked. And Sasuke, of all people, would know this after fighting Haku himself in the Land of Waves. "That kid is really starting to make a name for himself," Kakashi added, his eyes flitting over the cluster of spectators from the Land of Waves. "But Naruto is too, especially now that he's training with Jiraiya." Naruto and Haku were still circling each other, but at closer proximities, and their voices were loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You've come a long way, Haku," Naruto acknowledged, three kunai laced between his fingers in anticipation. "And now it's time to find out who's the better ninja between us." Haku didn't seem intimidated. "I'm far stronger than I was when we first met, Naruto. I sure hope you've been training hard or this won't be a long fight." Sakura couldn't help smiling. Haku and Naruto had developed a close bond over the months, but in spite of this, Naruto was incapable of suppressing his toxic, competitive nature in the heat of combat. This match was bound to be interesting. Unsurprisingly, Naruto made the first move. "It won't be, I'll defeat you in no time," he cried while conjuring a dozen clones and swarming his opponent. Orange blurs attacked aggressively and from different angles, firing weapons, throwing fists, and getting a feel for Haku's defensive skills. And they were impeccable, as Sasuke predicted. In a series of fluid, sweeping movements, Haku managed to prevent each and every clone from reaching him, by dodging and using only a small handful of Senbon to deflect the advancing weapons. "Oohs" and "ahs" rang across the stadium at the flawless evasive performance. Not deterred, Naruto tried again, rounding on Haku with twice as many clones, and this time, they were all far lighter on their feet, their strikes more deliberate, and their efforts combined to maximize them. Using rather impressive formations similar to his signature Uzumaki barrage, Naruto and his clones sprang off each other's backs, flung each other through the air to increase momentum, and attempted to finish sequences with open palm strikes at Haku's chakra points. If he were fighting any other ninja, Naruto would, without question, manage to land at least several of those precisely calculated hits, and maybe even win the fight right then and there. But he was up against a ninja with unique and unrivaled defensive prowess. So he didn't experience such success. Once the others were defeated, the only remaining group of Narutos, which likely included the real Naruto, advanced. One clone planted himself down and grasped two others by their wrists before swinging them around and hurling them towards the enemy. But their paths were blocked by ice spikes projecting straight out of the ground in a protective wall. All of the clones vanished in clouds of smoke and Naruto himself was thrown backwards. A spike managed to sever his leg in the process and tear the orange fabric of his pants at his calf. "Come on, Naruto," Sakura thought, absent-mindedly gripping onto the platform's metal rail with her gloved hands and gritting her teeth. "Try something else." This approach isn't going to work, Sasuke mumbled, voicing her thoughts. Sakura, who was immersed enough in the fight to temporarily ignore her discomfort over Sasuke's presence, turned to him. You nearly defeated Haku once. How did you do it? She asked while glancing at his profile. Sakura had been unconscious for that portion of the battle on Bridge 7. All she knew was that it had ended with Sasuke victorious and Haku on the verge of death. Sasuke's eyes opened a fraction wider when she addressed him. He didn't face her when he answered. It was kind of a blur, he confessed quietly. But the trick is to weaken him from a distance. My fire-style attacks helped with that. Both Kakashi and Sakura nodded while turning their attentions back to the fight. Naruto usually thrived in close-quarters combat. So what was he going to do? You'll need to do more than that to keep up with me, Haku sneered with a charming smirk. This comment seemed to rile Naruto up enough to spring back to his feet, dismissing the injury on his leg. Don't you get cocky. I'm just getting started. He growled and pulling his hands together to perform seals for a jutsu. Everyone leaned forward in their seats. Finally, a counter-attack. What? Reverse harem jutsu. A swirl of steam engulfed the competitors and from it emerged at least 20 gorgeous, naked men. Sakura's face paled. And then it reddened. Why, you've got to be kidding me, she groaned, while placing her hands on her cheeks. He's getting way too creative with that technique, said Sasuke, his nose crinkling and eyebrow twitching. But Kakashi, along with many others in the stadium, was chuckling. You can certainly tell who he's been training with. That's quite the distraction tactic. But why men? Sasuke asked, stealing the question right out of Sakura's mouth. Kakashi shrugged. Maybe it's wishful thinking. That's when Sakura recalled the time Naruto barged into the bridge builder's house and claimed to have met the most attractive guy ever last night in reference to his first meeting with Haku. Sasuke's mind clearly presented him with the same memory because it was his turn for his face to pale. Sakura exhaled deeply through her nose. She still needed to throttle her mischievous, blonde teammate for using a sexy jutsu imitating her on Sasuke in the Forest of Death. If this stupid trick actually worked and Naruto survived the fight, he'd have her to deal with afterwards. Whether or not the illusion had any real impact on Haku, it seemed to stun or confuse him for a second too long. Naruto managed to get directly behind Haku and nearly land an open-palmed blow to the base of his neck. But Haku shifted just in time, so Naruto's hand collided with his shoulder instead. Extremely abruptly and in the heat of his shock, Haku created the seals for a new jutsu with a single hand. A cyclone of snow and ice was suddenly engulfing Naruto, searing his skin and knocking him right off his feet. The localized winter storm followed him everywhere he scrambled, tossed, and turned. He was trapped. The crowd's volume increased tenfold as spectators marveled over Haku's remarkable storm manipulation ability. Even though the blizzard was confined to where Naruto was standing, the temperature in the entire stadium seemed to drop several degrees, the wind howled, and hail pellets cracked against the floor of the arena. He's going to freeze to death, Sakura thought with a stab of fear, while Naruto's exposed skin tinged a sickly shade of blue and his body curled in on itself. But surely Haku would stop before it got to that point, wouldn't he? The seconds dragged on and the audience grew restless. Snow and ice were piling up around Naruto, barricading him in place, and of what Sakura could see, his resisting and fidgeting was weakening by the second. Haku circled around the squall like a wild feline trapping its prey, his former title of ninja hunter never seemed more suitable. Apprehensive murmurs swept through the stands and Hayate even inched forward, determining whether to call the match. Sakura tightened her hold on the rail and narrowed her eyes. Snap out of it, she called out. Naruto, come on. Get out of there. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. First the ground rumbled ominously, causing the audience members to rock in their seats, some of them shouting with surprise. Next a red glow sprouted from somewhere within the storm and grew steadily larger. Then something unexpected happened. Naruto blasted his way out of the storm, shattering the ice and breaking the wind, and launched himself at Haku from all fours. He was cloaked in the nine tails bubbling chakra and moving at a lightning-fast speed. Sakura, and probably just about everyone else there, couldn't breathe. He struck and the impact whipped Haku's head to the side and forced him to end the storm. A nasty bruise was left behind on his cheek. A close-quarters battle ensued, where Naruto, whose speed and strength were enhanced by the fox's powers, was right in his element. Haku, still startled by Naruto's newfound strength, spent most of the fight dodging and blocking. Despite her relief over Naruto's escape from the storm, Sakura's heart hammered with fright at the sight of the fox's monstrous energy. "Please, Naruto. Don't lose control of yourself. Please." Her eyes sought out Jiraiya, who was also watching the fight intently, but was making no motion to restrain Naruto in any way. "Ice Dome!" Haku cried desperately and slamming his hand to the ground, while the other performed hand seals. A thick, gleaming wall of ice materialized around most of Haku's body, blocking Naruto's path. Its appearance seemed to pull Naruto to his senses too because he froze in place and the bubbling cloak began to fizzle out. Both competitors were evidently exhausted now, considering how Haku was capable of producing only about 3/4 of his ice dome technique, and Naruto was no longer being supported by the nine tails chakra. He was doubled over and breathing heavily. "Do something smart, Naruto," Sasuke growled and Sakura nodded in agreement, pursing her lips. It was clear that the match was nearing its end. She was practically clutching the railing for dear life. Naruto lowered into a defensive stance and reached into his weapon pouch. "Wrath!" he cried while tossing a fistful of explosive tags at the icy shield. They detonated on impact but failed to even scratch the dome. "That won't work," Haku gloated between breaths. "This defense is nearly impenetrable." "Damn it!" was Naruto's frustrated response while he tossed another fistful of explosives towards his opponent for good measure, before he started racing around Haku's defensive sphere. Obviously, the only way Naruto could get to Haku was through the dome's opening on the opposite side, which was precisely where Haku was lying in wait. Haku turned to face the dome's opening with a fistful of Senbon in hand, preparing to meet Naruto there. But at the intersection, just as the two of them were about to clash, Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke. Rasengan! Smash! Wait, what? Sakura gasped, her eyes just about bulging out of their sockets. Two Narutos were now standing directly behind Haku in a pile of shattered ice, supporting a small, glowing blue ball in their hands. The Rasengan vanished nearly as rapidly as it appeared, but that made no difference. With his enemy in a completely vulnerable, defenseless position, Naruto merely had to follow through with his movement to land an open palm on a chakra point in Haku's back. Haku collapsed to the ground, paralyzed. The entire audience was rendered speechless for a long moment before, slowly but surely, the cheers erupted. Sakura was on the verge of toppling over the railing. "He won," she breathed, and staring on with bewilderment. "I can't believe it." "So the second time he threw them, they weren't explosive tags at all," Kakashi said, and the amazement was audible in his tone. "Naruto and one of his clones disguised themselves as explosive tags. The third Naruto, who ran around the ice dome, was a mere distraction." Sasuke was shaking his head and smirking. "What a guy. I thought he was screwed back there." "He won," Sakura repeated, only half listening. Her heart was racing with excitement. Leave it to Naruto to win in the most dramatic, unconventional way possible. Before she could stop herself, Sakura slugged one arm around Sasuke's shoulder and the other around Kakashi's arm, because he was too tall for her to reach his shoulder, and squeezed tightly. She released them both before they had a chance to respond. The celebration over Naruto's win was drawn out. The Land of Waves villagers did not seem disappointed in the slightest because, after all, Naruto had played a major role in liberating them from Gato's tyranny. Naruto returned to the platform after courteously ensuring that Haku was in good hands. He would be unconscious for at least a full day, Sakura figured, if Naruto truly did manage to cut off his chakra circulation. It was only after Naruto gave Sakura, Hinata, who managed to stick around for the fight despite her injuries, and Kakashi bear hugs, and Sasuke a fond punch on the shoulder, did everyone in the stadium seem to calm down. And then Hayate's voice rang out, Niji Hyuga and Sasuke Uchiha, please make your ways down to the arena for the fourth match. Sakura's throat dried. After having been so caught up in the previous fight, it hadn't really occurred to her that there was only one turn left before her own. Just imagining herself stepping out of the tunnel and into the spotlight was enough to make her stomach drop. She also found herself nervous for Sasuke because he had a huge fight ahead of him too. Her eyes drifted down the platform to where Tenten and Guy were wishing Niji luck. It was the first time she'd seen Guy since his prized student was killed, and as a result of her actions in this life, somehow, her insides squirmed even more. You've got this, bastard, Naruto growled, while clapping his rival on the back. You'd better win if you want to stay on my level. While other encouraging words were exchanged, Sakura backed away silently, hoping to slip off to the bathroom and get a hold of herself. Sakura. Hold on. Crap. Yeah? She asked, and meeting Sasuke's serious stare. He looked intimidating again, for some reason. Don't go that way, he said quietly, and gesturing in the direction she was about to walk in. Kakashi and Naruto were also listening. Avoid the small guy from sand. He sounded like he was about to blow a fuse when I walked past him earlier. Sakura's gaze drifted over to Gaara, whose body was terse and vibrating. He was gripping his forearms and staring hungrily at Team 8, which had gathered beside his own squad. After the incident with Rock Lee in the preliminary matches, it was apparent that someone claiming Gaara might blow a fuse was not to be taken lightly. Watching the other matches had probably excited him somehow, and increased his bloodthirst. Right, Sakura mumbled, also noting how Kankuro was still awkwardly clinging to the rail. Creepy weirdo, Naruto muttered. I'll warn the others. And then he moved towards where Hinata and her teammates were congregated. Sasuke nodded approvingly and left before Sakura had a chance to wish him luck or thank him for not letting her back away to her death by Gaara's hand. So, Kakashi said when the other two were out of earshot. I heard that some unusual things have happened since we last spoke. Sakura half smiled. Unusual didn't even begin to cover it. She felt a tiny surge of warmth and hope at finally being alone with her sensei, who was one of the few people she felt she could trust and also who didn't despise her. Her nerves calmed enough for her to abandon her bathroom trip to collect herself. She also wanted to take advantage of her chance to finally speak to Kakashi privately. Your Fujihoan seal was created seamlessly, by the way, he said with raised eyebrows. I examined it during our travels in the land of rivers. It seems to be holding up. Sakura nodded slowly. Good, she said. I expect Sasuke told you about the circumstances around him needing it in the first place then. Yeah, he did, Kakashi answered in a somber tone. Sakura was honestly relieved that she wouldn't have to be the bearer of bad news. For that particular incident, at least. You know about the disease too? She asked. The gist of it. Sakura swallowed a lump in her throat. She desperately wanted Kakashi to know about everything, how she was, in fact, the target of Orochimaru and Kabuto's disease, how Kabuto was stalking her, and how they should be vigilant throughout the rest of the exam because their enemies just might be plotting another war. She also wanted to find out what was so special about the land of rivers. But she couldn't find the words. And she was interrupted. Let the fourth match begin. Sakura's heart leapt at the sight of Sasuke and Niji's ceremonious, pre-battle handshake and Hayate falling back to the sidelines. She would have to chat with her sensei another time. Because there wasn't a second of this fight that she would risk missing. The audience seemed to share her sentiments, as indicated by the delighted screams and shouts that met her ears. The young prodigies leaped backwards and squared each other up, resuming battle stances and plastering on their most serious glares. This fight would surely be the most vicious one yet. Prepare to lose, Uchiha, Niji spat, while bending his knees and extending his arms out on either side, palms up, in a wide stance. Bring it on, Hyuga, Sasuke replied with a cocky smirk, his fingers itching towards the sword at his hip. Niji snorted. Your defeat is inevitable, as it was for the rest of your ill-fated clan. A stony silence followed that remark, aside from a few astonished gasps. Naruto, who had rejoined his team, made an audible growl and Sakura was frozen with surprise. I forgot what a complete asshole that guy used to be, she thought while grinding her teeth, her blood boiling. What was that? Sasuke hissed, the smirk wiped clean off his face and a deep red staining his irises. Neji didn't seem to care that he was treading on thin ice. In fact, it seemed almost like he was deliberately trying to shatter it. Resisting your fate is useless. Take Rock Lee, my former teammate, who wanted, so badly, to defeat me despite his limitations. Sasuke's hand dipped into his weapon pouch and his jaw locked. If he'd only accepted his shortcomings, maybe things would have ended differently for him. You'd best learn from his errors. What the hell is wrong with you? Naruto bellowed, and he appeared on the verge of leaping clean over the railing and pummeling Neji himself, regardless of his exhaustion after his fight. Rock Lee was easy, Naruto, Kakashi warned while placing a steadying hand on his student's shoulder. Neji's just trying to get into Sasuke's head. Well, he's sure getting into mine, Sakura thought bitterly, seriously contemplating bounding into the arena herself. As anticipated, Neji's comments didn't sit right with Sasuke. Surprisingly, he responded, even though he wasn't usually one for talking. Shut up, he seethed, as the two of them began circling each other with their muscles tensed and weapons strung between their fingers. I would be dead in the second exam if it weren't for Rock Lee. That could have been my funeral last month. The stadium was so silent that Sakura could hear a pin drop. Lee didn't live a long life, Sasuke continued, his chakra spiking dangerously. But he pursued his goals tirelessly. And today, I'll defeat you and fulfill one of them in his stead. Sakura had a vice grip on the rail again and, for some reason, felt tears prickle in the corners of her eyes. Sasuke's speech was followed by applause as he likely won over the hearts of whatever spectators he hadn't won over already. I expected better of a supposed genius. What a disappointment, Neji scoffed. Sasuke chose not to answer, probably fed up with chatting. He fired a fistful of shuriken at his opponent and the match began. Neji's abilities in close-range combat were unrivaled, except by, perhaps, older members of his clan. But Sasuke seemed to anticipate that and managed to keep his distance for the first portion of the battle. The pace of the fight was extraordinarily fast, especially because Sasuke, who was on the offensive, was circling Neji at breakneck speeds while sending fireballs and explosives attached to weapons at his opponent. Neji, in turn, who was surprisingly light and graceful on his feet despite his broad and stocky stature, managed to evade most of the attacks with the help of his all-seeing Byakugan. The crowd was dazzled by Sasuke's fire-breathing and the various ways he managed to manipulate the element in enormous, roaring fireballs, in small explosive bursts, and in wave-like swoops. Neji was forced to use a basic water release technique to free himself from a ring of fire Sasuke managed to trap him in, but only after it singed Neji's sleeve and the skin of his forearm. Sasuke was showing no mercy, and Sakura suspected he was still enraged over Neji's insults at the start of the match. You seem unsteady, Sasuke jeered, aware that he had an upper hand. And, if my eyes serve me right, you get extra cautious when I attack from a certain angle. Compensating for a weakness, are you Hyuga? Sakura smirked. Sasuke's Sharingan succeeded in pinpointing Neji's blind spot. Enough. Neji shot back before advancing, using chakra to propel his feet along the arena's surface. He managed to finally catch his opponent and a taijutsu fight ensued, a style that put Sasuke at a huge disadvantage. The rate of Neji's attacks accelerated, and without his predictive ocular abilities, Sasuke might have lost the fight then and there. He barely managed to block Neji's onslaught of open palms with his forearms and fists, and clearly knew that he couldn't risk letting one land. A single, perfect hit from a Hyuga's gentle fist could put an end to a match or, depending on where it was aimed, one's life. Neji grew frustrated by Sasuke's ability to keep in stride with him, and so he took things up a notch. He began to turn as a swirl of chakra rose up from his feet, and then, in an astonishing burst, a rotating cloak of blue chakra surrounded him, deflecting all of Sasuke's attacks and even throwing him backwards quite a far distance. Ugh! Sasuke groaned as his back slammed against the ground. He rolled up onto the balls of his feet, trying to reorient himself, but he wasn't quick enough. Neji was on him again in a flash, pulling Sasuke up by the front of his black shirt, and aiming a chakra-laden palm directly at the center of his chest. "This is where it ends, Sasuke Uchiha!" he shouted, while throwing another hit. 8 palms. And then he moved like a machine, striking various spots on Sasuke's torso, arms, and shoulders. 16 palms. Shit! Sakura cursed. Sasuke was in danger now. Neji was using his infamous 8 trigrams 64 palms technique to seal the entirety of Sasuke's chakra circulation, and, if he was feeling hostile enough, damage Sasuke's vital organs. Unfortunately, hostile barely even captured the intense hatred Neji seemed to feel towards the Uchiha heir. Sakura wasn't the only one who sensed the trouble her teammate was in. "Sasuke, do something!" Naruto cried. "Sasuke-kun, come on!" Sakura joined in, surprising herself by how loudly her voice projected across the arena. Suddenly there was another blast of blue chakra, and for a brief moment, Sakura thought it was Neji's revolving heaven technique again, which would probably cause Sasuke some serious damage. But it wasn't, because this time it was Neji who was hurled backwards. And the chakra felt different. It crackled, it chirped. And when the chakra blast and the floating dust from the eruption settled, Sasuke was standing there, breathing heavily, and holding his sword out in front of him. Blue electric currents were pulsing along the blade. Sakura's breath caught in her throat. "Chidori?" she breathed while gazing down at Sasuke in amazement. Did Sasuke actually just manage to project Chidori out of his entire body, and now, channel it through his sword? Sakura remembered that Sasuke only managed to achieve this level of control over the technique after he had defected the village in her old life. "That it is," Kakashi answered, and she could hear the smile in his tone. Sasuke's chakra control is exceptional, so it didn't take long for him to discover that his Chidori didn't have to remain localized in his hand. "That's wicked," Naruto muttered, his jaw hanging open, not even bothering to pretend he wasn't impressed by his rival's stunning new skills. "But the catch is," Kakashi continued, "that technique requires an enormous amount of chakra. I expect Sasuke only has enough left to use Chidori one more time. He'll need to make it count." Using Neji's shock to his favor, Sasuke advanced with speed, and Neji scrambled up in preparation to defend himself. But then Sasuke paused, skidding to a halt, and launched his sword directly at Neji's head, like he was throwing a javelin. Neji anticipated the attack and performed his revolving heaven technique again, and the swirl of chakra blocked the sword and sent it flying to the other end of the arena. "What now?" Sakura thought, just about bending the metal rail from how tightly she was gripping it. But Sasuke didn't seem fazed. He held his hand out before him and produced another Chidori, this time directly in the center of his palm. And then, to Sakura's utter disbelief, he threw it along the same path his sword had taken, towards where Neji was slowing his spinning and dropping his guard. Sasuke lowered his stance and held out his arms, and, like a puppeteer manipulating a puppet, he moved the suspended ball of humming electricity through the air in a deliberate, measured fashion. Most of the audience was on their feet now because Sasuke's mastery of the lightning element was unimaginable for a genin his age. By the time Neji stopped spinning and realigned himself with Sasuke, the ball of electricity was hovering in the air directly behind him, but he didn't seem to notice its presence until Sasuke raised his hand and summoned it forward straight through Neji's side. He must have positioned the Chidori in Neji's blind spot, Sakura thought, covering her mouth with her hands, while, in a spurt of blood, the ball of electricity sliced Neji's hip and returned to Sasuke's hand. Sasuke caught his Chidori effortlessly, and on impact, it fizzled out and disappeared. Neji was frozen to the spot, probably from a combination of shock and pain. Sasuke moved forward one last time, driving his heel into Neji's chest and sending him to the ground, winding him, and ending the match. The crowd all but exploded, and was probably audible from the 4 other great nations. "Yes!" Sakura squealed in the heat of the thrilling moment, and exchanging hugs with her teammate and sensei. I knew he'd do it. Naruto cheered. Atta boy, bastard. Sasuke could have killed Neji there, you know, Kakashi said quietly, so that only his students could hear. Only a few inches over, and he could have sent that Chidori straight through Neji's abdomen. Sakura drew her attention back to the arena, where Sasuke, who had just been declared the winner by Hayate, was crouched beside Neji and exchanging words with him. It was impossible to hear them over the screaming and clapping, but Sakura really wished she could. Kakashi was right that Sasuke easily could have ended the guy's life, but, as Sasuke had admitted to her in the Forest of Death, he didn't like killing. When the medics arrived on site to examine the two of them, Sasuke even offered a hand to Neji, a noble and respectful gesture. Neji took it and nodded. And Sakura's heart fluttered. It's 2 for 2 so far, Kakashi said with a grin. My team is undefeated. You'll keep our winning streak up, Sakura-chan. I just know it. Naruto beamed while patting her on the back enthusiastically. Her stomach flipped at the reminder that she was up next. But then another thought occurred to her, and she chose to focus on it instead. Naruto, she said slowly, her eyes clouding over slightly. You're going to fight Sasuke next. If we even make it to another round of fights this time, that is. Huh? That's right, Kakashi chimed in. In the next round of fights, Hinata will fight Temari, and you will fight Sasuke. Naruto nodded energetically, his eyes wide. Oh man, I can't wait. And Sakura-chan, if you win, you'll fight. The winner of Gaara and Shikamaru's match, she answered, feeling queasy again. Knowing Shikamaru, he would probably forfeit the fight if Gaara pulled anything weird, and he probably would, if Sasuke's earlier comments about him held true. The waiting period in between the 4th and 5th fights ended far too soon. Sakura and Kabuto were called down to the arena before Sasuke had even made it back up to rejoin his team. After parting with Kakashi and Naruto, Sakura started walking down the platform in the opposite direction of Gaara's team, and towards the stairs that descended to the tunnel. She ventured ahead in a daze, only vaguely aware of the words of encouragement and pats on the arm she received. I'm nervous. I feel sick. I want today to be over, she chanted in her thoughts while praying for a distraction of some sort. She met Sasuke at the top of the stairs. He was evidently exhausted after his fight. There was sweat lining his forehead and cuts and bruises visible on the exposed skin of his arms. But he stood at attention when his eyes met Sakura's, and she had to resist her ridiculous urge to wrap her arms around him in search of comfort. She was feeling elated over his victory and hyper-anxious for her own fight, so now was probably not the time to pull other emotions into the mix. So instead, she nodded politely and offered a weak smile. Good job, she said. Good luck, he answered, and watching her pass and descend the stairs without straying from the spot. Focus, Sakura. Focus. With every shred of willpower she had, she pushed aside her thoughts of Sasuke, ignoring how she could still feel him watching her, and concentrated on not tripping down the staircase and making a complete fool of herself. Sakura sucked in a deep breath before she emerged from the tunnel, temporarily blinded by the bright sunlight. Kabuto was already there and was standing by Hayate in the center of the arena. She approached in a trance, the heels of her boots clicking against the solid ground. The crowd's roar sounded fuzzy, and the time travel scroll disguised in her weapon holster felt like a ball and chain. Kabuto looked as smug and confident as he always did, and was wearing his signature circular glasses, dark clothing, and white waistband. His arms were folded across his chest, exposing the gleaming, armored plates fastened to the back of his fingerless gloves. He shot a broad smile at Sakura and she pointedly ignored it. Hayate beckoned for the two of them to step forward and initiated the ceremonious handshake. Let me know if either of you wants to forfeit at any point, he said in his classic bored tone. Otherwise, I'll determine when the match has ended. Yeah. Sakura-chan. Naruto's voice trumpeted across the stadium, followed by several whoops and screams. Sakura glimpsed the bubbly blonde jumping up and down on the competitor's platform and noticed that Sasuke was now standing beside him. On the opposite side of the stands, Tsunade was raising her glass. Sakura chuckled and shook her head, feeling the tiniest burst of confidence. Alright, let the fifth match begin. Hey, proclaimed before jumping back to safety. Sakura and Kabuto instinctively did the same thing. Sakura assumed a battle stance of Lee's one she'd grown accustomed to using since she trained with him, standing straight with her right arm outstretched, palm up. It was impossible to predict how a battle would play out. It was like studying for a test or practicing for a sport. No matter how many skills a person had at their disposal, if those skills couldn't be adapted to the situation at hand, they were worthless. The fight commenced immediately. Both Sakura and Kabuto started by attacking at a distance with weapons. She leaped around, firing handfuls of shuriken from various angles, and he deflected them with a poised kunai and the metal plates on his gloves. She managed to evade his own barrages of weapons by dodging and deflecting them with carefully tossed shuriken of her own. It didn't take long for Sakura to grow frustrated with the nature of their fight. When she caught a short break, she pumped chakra down her leg, kicked her foot into the air, and drove the heel of her sandal to the ground, and from where it met, a crack formed and tore forward, directly at Kabuto, in a series of rumbling smashes. It was one of Tsunade's signature moves and had just the destabilizing effect she wanted. Sakura charged while Kabuto regained his footing, fully aware that he was faster than she was, but also that she was stronger than he was. The trick was to get in close. When she caught up with him, Sakura ducked and aimed a low, sweeping kick at Kabuto's legs, forcing him to jump over them to dodge. But just as he was landing, Sakura slammed a chakra-enhanced fist into the ground, which riveted and cracked the surface, and Kabuto lost his balance again. Bingo! Without wasting a second, she plunged forward and drove her other fist straight into his abdomen. Crack! With a poof, Kabuto disappeared and was replaced by a log, and Sakura blasted it to pieces, sending splinters flying in all directions. Crap! A substitution. Where is he? But thankfully Kabuto's vile presence was a hard one to miss, so when he reappeared behind her, Sakura was ready for him. She twisted around and raised her arms to block his attack, but then realized the hand directed at her was a scalpel throbbing with chakra. And it would surely tear right through her arms if she didn't get the hell out of the way. With nowhere to escape, Sakura resorted to an acrobatic maneuver she had practiced in her training with Lee. She flung her arms over her head and leaned back into a deep limbo, her body parallel with the ground below. Kabuto's arm and torso stretched right on top of her during her successful dodge, and before he could change the direction of the motion, Sakura took hold of the front of his shirt. Rough! She cried as she flipped him to the side and threw him away from her. Kabuto skid quite a distance before getting a hold of himself again. Sakura was honestly a little surprised by how much strength she summoned to fling him away, especially considering how much larger than her he was. But in the heat of battle against an enemy like him, using the power of her strength of 100 seal came effortlessly. She caught a whiff of distant cheering in the background, but Kabuto didn't give Sakura any time to relish in her short-lived success. Before she knew it, an enormous water projectile burst straight out of the ground at her feet with immense force, sending her toppling over to the side. Looks like he's a water type, Sakura thought while she rolled away and out of the projectile's line of fire. It followed her though, coursing through the air in a flying, rushing current, threatening to nail her into one of the arena's walls. But so am I. Although water-type ninjutsu wasn't a particular specialty of hers, Sakura did have an affinity for the element. So she tried the only counter-attack she could think of in the moment and faced the water projectile head-on, raising her arms and sending out a pulse of her own chakra through her fingertips, attempting to latch onto the water with chakra before it met her. And it worked. At the very last second, Sakura managed to redirect the aerial stream by splitting it into two parts, which cascaded to the arena floor and showered the spectators up front with water droplets. Kabuto frowned and lowered his own arms, pausing briefly to catch his breath. Sakura did the same, and reassessed her surroundings now that water was pooling across the floor. These changes to the battle environment might be advantageous in combat if she strategized, especially because she knew she could manipulate the water if she tried. Sakura's eyes flitted down to gauge the depth of the puddles, and jumped with surprise at what she saw. Kabuto's face was reflected in the water right at her feet. Sakura's eyes shot up frantically, searching for Kabuto above her. But he wasn't there. In fact, he was still standing ahead of her and hadn't moved an inch. The face was smirking. "I've had a fascination with the medical arts since I was a young boy," the face said casually, as if they were sitting down for tea. Sakura gaped down at the face for a long moment before glancing up at the real Kabuto, whose face held the same smug expression. The voice continued, echoing all around her as if it were being amplified by an intercom system, but the real Kabuto's lips didn't move at all. "Ever since, I've bided my time experimenting on my own subjects, but also monitoring the medical research facilities and hospitals of the hidden villages. It's in my head," Sakura breathed aloud, as the world around her started tipping out of focus. The water was molding into prism-like structures, and Kabuto's face was being reflected everywhere. "I heard about your abilities right away, of course, and so I tailed you on your journeys out of pure curiosity. What I hadn't known at the time was that I'd struck gold. This is genjutsu. Don't let him distract you. This is an illusion," Sakura repeated to herself, willing her body to relax and her mind to clear so that she could release herself from Kabuto's spell. But then the water prisms transformed again. They collected and grew into a single, massive beam of water. And before Sakura could prepare herself for it, the beam was blasted directly at her, knocking her backwards and sliding along the slick arena floor. "His attacks are real," she thought while taking a shuddering breath and leaning to the side to cough out a mouthful of water. "A short while ago, during my routine hacking of Konoha's hospital surveillance system, I stumbled on something most fascinating. I found you running through the hallway with none other than Sasuke Uchiha, the boy whom my master plans to take as a host. How intriguing it was to find that the very two we had our eyes on were connected somehow." Sakura sprang up to her feet just in time to evade the next water beam, but staggered a little from the gust it caused and from the disorienting effects of the genjutsu. "I was already thinking of developing a disease, you see, but never really planned to pursue it until an opportunity like you came along." "Kai!" Sakura cried, in attempt to free herself from Kabuto's disabling technique. "Kai!" But the water beam was chasing her, and she couldn't catch a break to clear her head or form the proper hand seals. "At first the goal was merely to push you to your limits to see what you were capable of. But then I realized the threat you posed. The threat you posed to the corruption of Orochimaru-sama's future host." Sakura bravely faced the water beam and channeled all the energy she could into her hands, hoping to bend the water away from her as she did before. But her chakra circulation was dampened and the world seemed to be moving in slow motion. "After witnessing the revolution you caused in the land of waves, I realized that your defeat would do more than destabilize Sasuke Uchiha, but the Hidden Leaf Village itself. You must be destroyed." Changing her mind at the very last second, Sakura turned her back on the advancing water, performed a few hand seals in rapid succession, and slammed her palms to the wet floor. And like she was pushing a lever, a muddy wall of earth sprang straight out of the ground behind her, blocking the water's path. The beam smashed into the wall, shattering parts of it to pieces, but overall, Sakura's earth-release defense succeeded in protecting her. It also gave Sakura a short opening. "Kai!" she gasped and her voice came out hollow and breathless. Her surroundings instantly came back in focus and the cursed voice disappeared. But now Sakura was on edge. For the most part, Kabuto's genjutsu confirmed what she already knew, that she was Kabuto and Orochimaru's target. However, now it was salient in her mind, and shaking her to her core. Was he going to try to kill her here then? Before an audience of mostly Konoha inhabitant spectators? Sakura charged up all the chakra she could muster to her fists. Let him try, she thought as a fierce growl resounded in her throat. She was feeling shaky, nervous, and hypervigilant. Her body was pleading for her to either fight or flee. And right now, there was only one option. Sensing Kabuto approaching from the other side of her half-shattered earth barrier, Sakura whipped around and smashed through it herself, catching Kabuto before he reached it. She followed through with the motion and punched him so hard that his body flung into the opposite wall of the arena with a bang and cracked it. Next thing she knew, Sakura was on him, straddling his hips and pummeling him mercilessly, using chakra to pin them both in place. In that moment, she couldn't process anything else: how she got there, why the audience was screaming, or why Hayate's voice was calling. All she knew was that she needed to kill Kabuto before he killed her. She continued to punch until his glasses cracked and blood gushed freely from his mouth and nose. And then something strange occurred. Kabuto started to laugh. It was peculiar enough for Sakura to freeze her fist's descent. "You get nightmares, don't you?" he choked out, somehow appearing smug from his beaten, vulnerable position below her. Sakura couldn't understand why he would try to taunt her in a moment like this, when he was at the mercy of her fists. "You're reckless. Hyper-reflexive. Your thoughts are scattered and you avoid things that trigger you. Haven't you put it together yet?" "What?" Sakura hissed, without the slightest idea what he was getting at. Her bloody, gloved fist was poised and loaded with chakra. "I can tell you've been through war. Perhaps not war in the classic sense, but one that haunts you and tears you apart from the inside." Sasuke flashed across her mind's eye, the older Sasuke from her other life, whose skin was tinged gray, who supported grotesque, ominous wings, and reeked of everything she feared. "You're your own worst enemy, Sakura. All I have to do is..." "Shut up!" Sakura shrieked, losing patience for his psychological derailment, and coiling her arm back to strike again. However, this time, Kabuto caught her wrist and pushed her off, taking advantage of Sakura's unsettled state. And while she stumbled back, he impaled her with a chakra scalpel. His arm tore through her dress, through the flesh of her abdomen, and as her own blood splattered onto her face and arms, Sakura appreciated that this blinding pain wasn't quite like anything she'd ever felt before. It was a pain that marked the end. There were collective screams somewhere in the distance, but they were drowned out by a hazy voice. "Use it. Now." "Why yes, Tsunade-sama," Sakura whispered with every shred of strength she had, while hot blood trickled through her parted lips and down her chin. Her forehead burned and her numb hands stretched forward automatically, gripping onto locks of Kabuto's gray hair. Chapter 33: A Tide Turned. "You," Sasuke snarled, his Sharingan igniting and black marks creeping up the base of his neck. "Stay away from me." And then he left. Without a backwards glance, Sasuke made a beeline for the village core, his hands balled into fists, the curse on his neck stinging, and his mind racing. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that, wherever it was, it needed to be far away from her. Why didn't she tell me sooner? He fumed, his chest tightening painfully. He felt betrayed. After years of vowing to pursue his revenge in isolation, without the distraction of unnecessary bonds and connections, recently, he had imagined that, perhaps, a connection with Sakura wouldn't be a setback. Perhaps, he had thought, a connection with her would help him. They were both Avengers, after all, and strong ones at that. Combining their efforts for a common goal seemed logical and efficient. And, not to mention, there was the added perk of Sasuke truly not minding her company. "I'm an idiot," he thought, while slamming a fist into an undeserving tree trunk, cracking it on impact. Trusting her was a mistake. Above all, Sasuke's pride had taken a blow. It felt like he was being ridiculed somehow. How dare she refer to the murder of his parents, of his entire clan, and the basis of his life goal as a ploy? He was just trying to silence the screams that haunted his nightmares and do something to bring honor to his prestigious family name. Itachi himself had told Sasuke, on the night of the massacre, to hate him for his crimes. So how could the village have anything to do with it? It felt like Sasuke's world was caving in on itself. It couldn't be that his perspective of his family's legacy had been skewed all this time. Or could it? The sun had set by the time Sasuke gained his bearings. He had wandered all the way to the heavily populated center of the village, near the Hokage Tower. Most passers-by were, like him, wearing all black, not having changed since Rock Lee's funeral that morning. This made it easy for him to spot the familiar face in an army green Jonin vest. Sasuke's initial instinct was to take cover and avoid the newcomer altogether, but an impulsive decision changed his mind. Now might be just the opportunity I've been waiting for. Kakashi. Truth be told, Sasuke mapped out a trip to the Land of Rivers several hours prior. He just didn't think he'd actually follow through with the plan so abruptly. He was also surprised that, so willingly, Kakashi agreed to accompany him there straight away. There's a swordsmith in Takumi village known for his skills in designing weaponry, Sasuke said, his carefully researched excuse escaping his lips effortlessly. I want you to train me there. Kakashi paused for a moment, his eyebrows raised with curiosity. Gai-sensei, and an uncoordinated, and probably drunk, blonde woman, who Sasuke now knew had been Tsunade Senju, went ahead so that Kakashi could speak to his student in private. Gai probably hasn't heard about Lee yet. Sasuke thought, his stomach tinging uncomfortably. Just let me file my mission report and put a word in with the Hokage, was all Kakashi said before dismissing Sasuke and turning towards the tower. With a surge of adrenaline, Sasuke went straight home to pack his training and traveling gear, and, exactly 30 minutes later, met Kakashi at Konoha's front gates. The Land of Rivers was located on the southwestern border of Fire Country and would only take about 3 days' travel or even 2 if they moved quickly enough, details Sasuke knew long before they departed. When Sakura confessed her plans of revenge in the cave during the second exam, Sasuke learned more valuable information than he had bargained for. At first, he merely hoped to better understand his frustratingly interesting teammate's backstory, but when she started speaking about the Akatsuki, particularly about Itachi being a part of it, Sasuke paid attention to every painstaking detail of her stories. There were Akatsuki hideouts planted across the nations, it sounded like, and the hideout Sakura knew most about, and shared the most information on, was in the Land of Rivers. It was the first one Konoha discovered, she had explained, hidden in the caverns to the north. I fought one of the Akatsuki there, actually. Sasori, who was a puppet master. Was? Sasuke had repeated, while watching Sakura intently. Did you win? I did, she answered with a small smile that he wanted to reciprocate, but Sasuke couldn't help noticing the hollowness in her eyes. But I have a feeling I'll need to go back there someday and finish him off. I don't think he's through with me. So Sasuke had, dutifully, taken it upon himself to research the place, because, after all, he and Sakura would probably venture there in the future, to either take out Akatsuki members once the two of them were ANBU Black Ops, or merely explore and gather intel. He was planning to look into it more intensely when he had the chance, but in the meantime, in between the funeral and the third exam announcement, he had made a quick stop at the library, where he studied its map and learned about the famous weapons shop. So why was Sasuke so bent on going there now? He was no idiot. Sasuke was acutely aware that he was nowhere near strong enough to kill his brother. But that wasn't what this was about. He just needed answers, something grounding, something to appease his burning desire for a life goal. And if Itachi's current whereabouts were connected to the Land of Rivers somehow, maybe he could learn more about him there. They left at dusk and arrived at their destination in great time. The forests on Konoha's outskirts began to thin the further they ventured, cliffs springing out of the ground, and in between them, rivers and waterfalls wound and splashed, leaving the air damp and fresh. Sasuke didn't mind traveling with his sensei. Like himself, Kakashi didn't talk much, required very little to keep occupied, and went great lengths to cut their travel time. And, even though he would never admit it aloud, Sasuke felt safe in Kakashi's presence, as the man had become something of a mentor and father figure to him over the months they shared on Team 7. During their brief stops, Kakashi helped Sasuke advance his Chidori. He also examined Sakura's Fujihoan seal, which he deemed strong enough to not require tampering, while Sasuke confided their Chunin exam experiences, including Orochimaru's curse infliction, the spreading disease, Lee's death, and how Sakura had unlocked her seal. Kakashi thankfully didn't ask many questions but seemed gracious for Sasuke's disclosures. They stopped in Takumi village first, where Sasuke purchased a sword from the weapons shop. He had to admit that Kenjutsu had always fascinated him. So this detour served as the perfect opportunity to learn the craft. Next, they ventured north and trained in the sparsely populated parts of the Land of Rivers, far away from Tanagakure, the country's hidden village. Sasuke kept his eyes peeled for any indication of something resembling a hideout because he knew the northern caverns weren't far, but for their first week of training, they didn't encounter a soul or anything suspicious at all. The week certainly wasn't wasted though. It turned out Kakashi was quite well versed in kenjutsu himself, after having studied the craft during his years as an ANBU. They sparred for long hours, alternating between using the sword and defending from it with other weapons and nearby branches. As the days stretched on, the sword felt lighter and more comfortable in Sasuke's hand. He found that he picked up the skill naturally, so much so that he managed to combine it with ninjutsu. In between endurance, kenjutsu, and lightning element training, Sasuke realized that, with just the right exertion of chakra, tiny bolts of Chidori could be conducted along the blade. "You'll surpass me at this rate," Kakashi noted with a gentle smile. His tone held no resentment. Rather, he seemed proud of his student's discovery. And Sasuke couldn't help feeling quite proud himself. In the coming days, as he explored his newfound abilities and pushed his body's limits through rigorous training, Sasuke entered something of a blissful state. In between training, they camped out in the trees, hunted freshwater fish from the rivers, concealed their tracks, and hiked through the mountains. Sasuke had never encountered an environment quite like this one before. The terrain, greenery, and wildlife were unfamiliar. So there were plenty of new survival tactics for him to learn as well. It wasn't until the second week of training for the third exam that things got particularly interesting for the Uchiha heir. Kakashi and Sasuke had been cooking two of their preserved fish for lunch among the jagged rocks at a mountain's base, partially concealed by surrounding brush and trees, when they detected a chakra signature nearby. They exchanged a look and, wordlessly, staunched the fire and hastily packed their things. There was no sense engaging in unneeded combat here. But then the branches rustled behind them. Instinctively, both Sasuke and Kakashi dropped what they were holding, including the newly purchased sword. Sasuke didn't have a proper place to store it yet, and sprang away from their campsite, in opposite directions, to conceal themselves from any approaching enemies. If this was an ambush, the priority was to get out of the line of fire. Sasuke's heart drummed anxiously as he peered through the tree branches. He couldn't see Kakashi from his position, but suspected his sensei was doing the same. As much as he hoped the intruder was just a fluke, some animal unconnected to the chakra signature, they sensed another adrenaline-filled part of him privately wouldn't have minded a fight. A tall, cloaked man quite unlike anyone Sasuke had ever seen stepped out from the trees. He appeared to be a man crossed with a shark. His body was burly and muscular, and his sheer skin tinged blue and stretched across his bony, skeletal face. The cloak was jet black, high-collared, and dotted with swirling, red clouds, and his Kirigakure head protector was slashed through. As peculiar as his appearance was, however, it hardly compared to the rolling, murky chakra radiating from him. Sasuke's body locked in place. Could he be from the Akatsuki? "Oi, you'd better come have a look at this," the shark man called over his shoulder in a nasally voice, revealing rows of finely pointed teeth. He kicked aside the twig Sasuke and Kakashi had used for kindling and scanned the ground through slit pupils. "What is it, Kisame?" replied another voice from somewhere a little deeper in the trees. Sasuke's throat constricted because it wasn't just any voice. "See for yourself," Kisame answered, pulling back his translucent gums into a toothy sneer. And then Itachi emerged. Wearing a black and red cloak identical to his counterpart, he was exactly the same as Sasuke remembered, with his long, dark hair secured at the nape of his neck, his features striking albeit aged slightly and his eyes a piercing, Sharingan-lit crimson. Except this time, there was a slash through his Konoha head protector, and what Sasuke assumed was a cloak indicating his Akatsuki allegiance. Before he knew quite what he was doing, with his legs feeling like jelly and his stomach turning, Sasuke leapt down. He squared up the newcomers, dismissing how Kakashi must be furious with him for this, and dipped a trembling hand into his weapon pouch. "Ah," Itachi said monotonously, while surveying Sasuke through an indifferent gaze. "Elder brother," Sasuke answered, his voice coming out far steadier than he felt. He honestly didn't know what he wanted to achieve by facing Itachi right now. If they fought, Sasuke knew he would be killed. But his instincts and curiosity had pulled him to action. And now some combination of rage and fear was keeping him in place. "We'd best relocate," Itachi drawled and turning away disinterestedly. Sasuke's own Sharingan were activated by the chakra pulsating through his temples and optic nerve. "Stop, Itachi," he growled, his voice instinctively rising. He didn't come all this way to be ignored and cast aside. But Itachi strode away, back towards the trees, without backwards glance. "I said stop," Sasuke yelled, feeling fire-release chakra well up in his chest. "I know the truth." Itachi froze in his tracks. "Truth?" Kisame repeated and glancing between the two Uchiha brothers. "About that night," Sasuke tried desperately. "The night you slaughtered our clan." The next events occurred in such rapid succession that Sasuke could hardly process them. Barely a second after the words escaped his lips, Sasuke found himself surrounded by a ring of black flames that appeared out of thin air. They radiated a scorching heat and stretched several feet higher than Sasuke, trapping him and obscuring the world outside the ring. Except for when, between the tongues of fire, Itachi's face briefly came into view and they caught eyes. Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan pulled Sasuke into a Tsukuyomi, a familiar, illusionary world marked by red and black hues and altered time and space perceptions. Sasuke's heart hammered with fear as the forest slipped away and was replaced by an empty, endless red plain, and the sound of howling wind rang in his ears. The last time Itachi used this very technique on his younger brother, he had forced Sasuke to watch his family be murdered over and over again, for days on end. In this illusion, Sasuke's mind was subjected to whatever Itachi desired for him to see. In a screeching swarm of crows, Itachi materialized before him. In the middle of the barren plain. "What truth?" His deep voice echoed while he took a step closer. "There is a letter written by Konoha's elders in the Hokage Tower. It says that you slaughtered our clan on Konoha's orders," he growled, getting right to the heart of the matter and forcing as much conviction into his tone as he possibly could. The Itachi inside the genjutsu raised his eyes to the cloudy red and black sky and closed them. A long moment passed. "This complicates things," was Itachi's eventual, stoic reply. He met Sasuke's gaze and there was an unusual softness in his expression. "You shouldn't know this." Sasuke's breathing hitched. Why isn't he protesting? It was so much easier to just blame and hate Itachi for the massacre. Sasuke wasn't ready to believe that there might be even greater issues at hand. To truly believe what Sakura told him on the path. "You mustn't blame them." "Blame who?" "Konoha?" "Why not?" Sasuke spat. "And even if it was just an order, why did you do it?" "Mom. Dad." Sasuke's throat grew extremely tight. His tear ducts stung as moisture developed there. Itachi didn't answer but rather, vanished entirely. Sasuke remained petrified to the spot as the landscape began to shift, tilting out of proportion until it transformed into a familiar setting, the sitting room of Sasuke's former house. Two figures appeared there, and it didn't take long for Sasuke to recognize them as a younger Itachi and their father. The story was told through images, starting with how Fugaku Uchiha ordered his eldest son to gather intel on Konoha's Anbu Black Ops from the inside. Sasuke quickly learned, through snippets of Itachi's memories presented by the Tsukuyomi, that the Uchiha clan had been preparing an uprising, led by Fugaku himself. He watched when his older brother learned of the Uchiha clan's international affiliations and when it dawned on him that this uprising would cause a war. Itachi's exposure to war followed memories of battlefields, decaying bodies, gore, and heartbreak, and Sasuke could feel Itachi's fear and mental turbulence through the genjutsu, through the memories. The face of his infant self flashed before his eyes next. "I couldn't let a war happen," Itachi's voice rang out, while images of him tossing and turning in bed, of him tiptoeing down the hallway of their old house to check on Sasuke while he slept, of him cradling his baby brother, appeared. The words "I needed to keep you safe" went unspoken, but Sasuke felt them. He also felt wetness on his face and a pang in his heart. Itachi then revealed how he reported the Uchiha clan's actions to a far younger third Hokage, and how a frightening masked man with a mane of black hair cascading down his back, who called himself Madara Uchiha, offered to annihilate the Uchiha clan himself. The third Hokage tried to negotiate with Madara in pursuit of peace, but Danzo, one of the village elders, supported Madara, and claimed that they couldn't risk a single member of the Uchiha clan surviving. The other elders did not protest. Itachi, in a moment of sheer panic and shock, volunteered to assist Madara in wiping out the clan because that way, at least, he could execute a tiny shred of control over the impending fall of the Uchiha. His memories flashed forwards to their parents on death's door, kneeling at Itachi's feet. Sasuke winced with fright, unwilling to witness the murder of his parents again, but instead, a different memory presented itself. They told Itachi that they were proud of him. "Take care of Sasuke," Mikoto whispered, a beautiful, haunting smile sprouting on her lips, before she closed her eyes and waited for her oldest son to run her through with his blade. The Tsukuyomi pulled Sasuke from the scene before the deaths occurred, and followed with fleeting images of Itachi reporting that the mission succeeded to the third Hokage, of him leaving Konoha, of him slashing his leaf forehead protector with a kunai, and, finally, of him pulling on an Akatsuki cloak and glancing over his shoulder to meet Sasuke's eyes. The memory disappeared. Sasuke blinked and then Itachi was towering directly over him. After softly tapping Sasuke's forehead with 2 fingers, he said, quietly, "This is my mission. You mustn't follow me." The genjutsu broke and Sasuke collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily, tears pooling in his eyes and streaming freely down his cheeks. The smell of forest and freshwater filled the unexpectedly cold air, and tiny rocks tore through Sasuke's knees as he landed on them. But he hardly noticed he was far too paralyzed by a painful, debilitating shock. The black flames of Itachi's Amaterasu subsided, leaving Sasuke alone and trembling on the ground. He vaguely heard Kisame say, "What truth?" To which the real Itachi replied, calmly, "The truth of why I spared my foolish brother's life that night so that he may grow in hate and one day become a worthy opponent." And then they turned and left. Sasuke blinked up through bleary, watery eyes, and caught a final glimpse of Itachi's billowing, dark cloak bursting into a flock of crows. One of Sasuke's own memories from the night of the massacre surfaced. He remembered that, as Itachi was leaving after their brief encounter, he had been crying. The sight had been so fleeting that Sasuke later convinced himself he dreamed it. Why? He had asked himself. Why would a murderer ever cry for his victims? And so he had dismissed the memory as wishful thinking and focused on his grief and burning fury. But it was a real memory after all, wasn't it? A double agent, Sasuke breathed to the ground, his tone softer and feebler than he could ever remember it being. Tears were dripping off his nose and trickling into his mouth. He had never felt more small and confused as he did there, crouched on the ground among the land of River's northern mountains. He's lying to Kisame. He spared me because... Kakashi left his hiding spot, landing beside his student with a gentle thud. It made sense that he hadn't emerged from his hiding spot earlier. He was probably waiting for the least suicidal moment to join the scene and protect his student from 2S-ranked criminals. And how strange it must seem to him that, in seconds, Sasuke was crippled and brought to tears. It must have appeared, from an outside perspective, that Sasuke was injured by Itachi or his black flames. "I'm not going to lecture you," Kakashi said, while placing a steadying hand on Sasuke's back and picking up the sword with the other. "Because I'm sure you now know that jumping down from your hiding spot was a really stupid idea." Yeah, Sasuke lied. His sensei couldn't have been more wrong. They traveled south next, far away from the mountains and the Akatsuki base, wherever exactly it was, and settled on staying at an inn in Tanigakure to freshen up and hide among the other ninjas there. Kakashi explained that it would be unwise for them to travel through the generally empty, vulnerable expanse of forest connecting the land of rivers and fire country while S-ranked criminals may be after them. "Sure," Sasuke said with a shrug while towel-drying his hair and pulling his blue t-shirt back on. The inn's shower wasn't nearly as nice as the one he had at home, with the way the water temperature and pressure fluctuated, but after over a week without a proper one, it was refreshing anyways. "Although I doubt they'd care to follow us." "You're probably right," Kakashi agreed, while massaging his temples. He would undoubtedly need a vacation after this trip, which he probably originally thought would serve as a relaxing break between missions. But I'll have to tell the Hokage about our sighting of Itachi. And I'm sure Itachi knows that. So there is a chance he'll try to prevent us from getting home. I guess, Sasuke answered, and absent-mindedly noticing a tear in the sleeve of his shirt, while his chest tightened. If Itachi was truthful in his revelations, he was acting as a hidden protector of the village. It wasn't fair that the village hated him. But Itachi brought that onto himself, didn't he? He wanted to play the villain to unify the villagers against him so that they wouldn't turn on each other. The third Hokage was in on this the whole time. I'm taking a walk, Sasuke proclaimed, while straightening up and motioning towards the door. Kakashi nodded. Don't stray too far, was all he said, probably understanding that Sasuke would need some privacy after encountering his rogue, criminal brother, before he paced over to the bathroom for his own shower. Tani was significantly smaller than Konoha, but its few streets were densely populated. Sasuke navigated through the throng aimlessly, bumping shoulders with strangers without care. What was he to make of this? He loved his parents and they didn't deserve to die. But, if he was honest with himself, he also loved his brother. And trusted him. You mustn't blame them for this, Itachi had said. But if not Konoha, then who was to blame? This Madara fellow, who planned the scheme from the start. The village elders, for agreeing to it and deliberately failing to protect his family from the slaughter? Because, no matter how he spun it in his mind, he could no longer blame Itachi, his self-sacrificial, ever-protective elder brother who would never gain the positive recognition he deserved. And so, without anyone or anywhere to clearly direct his hurt over his dead family, instead, Sasuke blamed himself. Blamed himself for failing to understand Itachi's plans sooner or grasp that a coup d'état had been brimming right under his nose for the first 8 years of his life, for wasting his life chasing a misguided goal, for villainizing the person who probably loved him more than anyone in the world. It was a ploy. Your revenge, the massacre, a ploy. And then there was guilt. Because Sakura was right and cared enough to tell him the truth in the first place, and he'd only hated and pushed her away for it. If it weren't for her confession of what she discovered in that letter in the Hokage Tower, Sasuke might have continued leading an isolated, delusional path. And wasted his life away following it. Sasuke pushed more aggressively through the crowd, through an alley, and to the outskirts of the village, and emptied his stomach in the bushes. For 2 days and nights following his encounter with Itachi, Sasuke couldn't bring himself to do anything, not train, sleep, or even eat. He only picked at his food to keep Kakashi from nagging him about it. His forehead protector was left at his bedside, untouched. Sasuke had always been a restless, light sleeper because sometimes the nightmares were unbearable. But now there was an emptiness rooting in his core like he'd never felt before. A purposeless, agitated unsettlement that completely and utterly consumed him. After his 3rd shower since they arrived in Tani, Sasuke gazed at his own reflection in the shabby bathroom mirror. His dark, hollow eyes reflected exactly how he felt. What's the point? He thought, and those were the only coherent words his mind could string together. A sharp pounding on the door sounded. Hey, came Kakashi's voice. Let's go outside. Then the door to their inn swung open and shut. Sasuke obliged, as not to upset his sensei, so he pulled on his clothes and followed suit. It took several days for Kakashi to help Sasuke back on his feet. At first, he let Sasuke do as he pleased, hike through the forest alone, stare out at the winding rivers and occasionally wade through them, and sleep outside in the shelter of the trees, all while Kakashi kept a close watch on him. He didn't pry or force his student to return to his training routine, which Sasuke, uncharacteristically, seemed to have no interest in. One early evening, while Sasuke was sitting high in the trees just outside of Tani and sucking in the crisp air through deep breaths, Kakashi fired a shuriken at him. Reflexively, Sasuke dodged it, which forced him to leave his shelter and land in the clearing below, facing his sensei. Without saying a thing, Kakashi advanced with his fists raised and aimed a punch at Sasuke's shoulder. Sasuke blocked it with his forearms. Then Kakashi sent his other fist at his student's head. Sasuke caught his wrist. A taijutsu fight ensued, and Sasuke found that, with each punch and kick he threw, the less restless he felt. He allowed himself to be consumed by his body's movements, and in a way, they became meditative for him. They trained in this manner for hours, and eventually Kakashi pulled out Sasuke's new sword to practice with, and before they knew it, the hours stretched into days. Sasuke was reminded of why he loved the ninja arts, and it was this passion mixed with the rhythmic exercises and fighting routines they practiced, over and over, that, very gradually, broke the persistent loop that Sasuke had been trapped in. One day, Kakashi dragged him out for lunch after their morning taijutsu and kenjutsu practice. And, for the first time since their encounter with Itachi and Kisame, Kakashi addressed the upcoming exam. "You've got an important fight to train for, Sasuke. Neji of the Hyuga clan won't be your average opponent," he said. "This is a chance for you to bring even more honor to your family name in front of high-ranking international delegates." Right. Right. "Get out there, become a Chunin, and make our team proud," Kakashi added, smiling beneath his mask. "But first, you've got to get stronger." "Right. I need to achieve a Chunin rank if I'm ever to be an ANBU. And help Sakura with her revenge." "Yeah," Sasuke said, and reaching for another mouthful of rice, his appetite spiking a little more. Days after, Sasuke made a quick stop at a local tailor on the way to training with the intention of asking for his sleeve to be mended. But then a new idea occurred to him. "I need somewhere to keep my sword," he muttered, and pausing in his tracks. "You need new clothes," said Kakashi with a chuckle and eyeing Sasuke's ripped sleeve with a raised eyebrow. "Go get something and we'll train when you're finished." So he did. Sasuke entered the closest store that sold clothing and combat gear. When the young shop owner asked what he was looking for, his only requirements for his outfit were material that could withstand extreme heat and fast movement, no sleeves, because fuck sleeves, and no orange. The shop owner, a young civilian woman with gray eyes and pale, blonde hair twisted atop her head, did a pretty good job piecing something together that suited him both visually and practically. It started with a fitted, dark blue undershirt, black sandals that ended mid-calf, and heavy, gray pants, followed by a sleeveless, black shirt, on which he ordered the red and white family crest of his old shirt to be sewn, and a thick belt that covered most of his midsection and had a groove and clasp where the sword sheath could be fastened. Sasuke nodded approvingly at himself in the floor-length mirror and pulled his head protector on over his forehead. "Do you like it?" the young woman asked, her eyes practically bulging out of their sockets as she gave him a once-over, which ended up being at least a thrice-over. Her face was flushed. "It's fine," Sasuke said, while shoving a wad of money on the wooden counter. It would probably cover plenty more than the cost of the outfit, but he wasn't in the mood to count it out and, with the inheritance money of nearly 100 family members, cost was never really an issue. She fumbled with the register, her face darkening with each passing second, while she printed out a receipt. Do you?" she stammered, and averting her eyes to the counter. Sasuke raised his eyebrows expectantly, wondering if he had, somehow, underpaid or something. "Do you want to go for tea?" She finally got out, while blinking rapidly and pursing her lips. "I finish work at." "No," he interrupted without second thought. "Ah, of course," she said with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry. You must be taken, then?" It took Sasuke a long moment to figure out what she was getting at. "Yes," he said automatically while reaching for the receipt she finally managed to print and leaving the shop, trying to convince himself that the only reason he said yes was because no would have sounded like an invitation. Sasuke's mind began to clear as the month passed, with his rigorous training for the fast-approaching third exam keeping him occupied. He started sleeping a little better, and looked forward to his training excursions with Kakashi, but he still felt a little lost and purposeless. He was now keenly aware that there were much bigger issues at stake than advancing to Chunin. He would probably always be haunted by trauma from the massacre he witnessed as a child, but now, at least, he understood that there had been more going on behind the scenes than he previously imagined. And until he determined exactly how he was going to act upon this new knowledge, whether redemption still needed to be sought, and if so, against whom, he latched onto his promise to Sakura. His promise of building his strength and defecting the village with her one day to aid her with her own quest for vengeance. There was still a thrill in that for him. His guilt did not waver over the days. Now that he had time to reflect properly, Sasuke realized that he was a humongous hypocrite. During his last encounter with Sakura, when they walked along the path to the training grounds, he intended to tell her to give up on saving her ex-boyfriend, who she still loved, apparently, because, evidently, she could do much better, and a part of him hoped that giving up would allow her to turn her affection elsewhere. He didn't want to stop her from killing the enemies on her hit list, but he did want her to find a new purpose for doing so. He was tired of watching Sakura's inner demons drive her mad. But then, when Sakura implied that his revenge was futile, he'd lost it at her. Because he was unable to quiet his own demons. And now she probably resented him for it. He suspected that it hadn't been easy for her to build up the nerve to tell him about the letter, but she'd done it anyways. Instead of thanking Sakura, Sasuke had pushed her away and left her. Needless to say, he was dreading their reunion at the exam. By the last week in the Land of Rivers, Sasuke's zeal and excitement for the exam had grown, especially after he learned to throw and suspend his Chidori in the air. His sword was starting to feel like a natural extension of his arm, and Kakashi seemed extremely pleased with his student's development over the month. Sasuke also grew eager, albeit anxious, to see his teammates again. As much as Kakashi was a compatible traveling companion, Sasuke missed the contrasting energies that Naruto and Sakura brought. He insisted on making another stop in Takumi village on the way back to Konoha. He needed to make amends with Sakura somehow, and remembered how happy she'd been the last time he got her something, the beakers and test tubes he'd purchased before their mission to the Land of Waves. She always complained about her dwindling collection of weapons and borrowed his while they trained together, so he figured she would appreciate some new ones. Sasuke slipped into the weapons shop discreetly, claiming that he had a quick errand to run. But when he came out, with Sakura's gift tucked away in his own weapon pouch, Kakashi said, "She's not the flower type, huh?" Sasuke released a sigh and carefully avoided eye contact. They planned to arrive in Konoha on the day of the third exam. Thanks to Kakashi's classic tardiness, they showed up late. But Sasuke didn't mind because they reached the competitors' platform just in time for Naruto's fight. The brimming atmosphere of the arena was toxic. So, within seconds of being there, Sasuke's adrenaline was running high. It seemed that Hinata Hyuga had won her fight, an unanticipated outcome. And as soon as Sasuke and Kakashi began climbing the stairs to join the others on the raised platform, the audience roused hysterically. "We're making quite a fuss, huh?" Kakashi said with a chuckle, his hands shoved leisurely in his pockets. "Now, let's find your teammates." "Yeah," Sasuke mumbled while keeping his eyes trained on the ground and passing by a particularly angry Gaara, who was cursing under his breath and trembling. Sasuke made a point of sidestepping him because he knew that a quarrel with that guy could turn deadly mighty fast. Honestly, before he even got on the platform, Sasuke knew exactly where Naruto and Sakura were, gathered together on the opposite end. His dread over encountering Sakura again heightened. How the hell would he address her, the person he owed more than he could ever offer, but who probably despised him? "Is that you, bastard?" "Here we go," he thought, and bravely approaching his team. And, unfortunately, the reunion was even worse than Sasuke anticipated. What followed were a series of tense, awkward, and utterly gut-wrenching encounters. Sasuke never figured out how to talk to or even look at Sakura without feeling ashamed of himself. "She's pissed. She hates me," Sasuke inwardly groaned, noticing how Sakura seemed to be doing everything she could to avoid him. She had good reason to be on edge, he figured, because she had a challenging match ahead too, but that didn't make their small talk any less unbearable. Naruto managed to win his fight in a show-stopping manner by using a new technique, called Rasengan, to blast through Haku's ice dome after several instances where it appeared he lost. Sasuke shook his head and smirked. "What a guy. I thought he was screwed back there," he said. "He won." Sakura exclaimed, and in the heat of her joy, she actually slung an arm around Sasuke's shoulder. He just about jumped with surprise, but she released him, probably regretting the action, before he even had a chance to process it. Neji was a challenging opponent, as Sasuke and Kakashi had anticipated. It turned out he was also a real pain in the ass. His fixation on fate and Sasuke's destined failure really rubbed him the wrong way, especially now that Sasuke had learned firsthand, through his recent encounter with Itachi, that one's life course was subject to change if they sought knowledge in the right places. So he became determined to beat the shit out of the guy as best he could. There was a brief moment where Neji nearly won by targeting Sasuke's chakra points with his 8 trigrams 64 palms technique. However, with the help of his Sharingan, Sasuke managed to evade the first 16 rapid blows by shifting his weight just enough for Neji's strikes to miss their targets by mere millimeters. That wasn't to say that the blows didn't hurt like a bitch though, and as Neji's assault increased in speed, even Sasuke's eyes struggled to keep up with them. He was forced to desperately blast his opponent away by projecting Chidori from his entire body. Sasuke won the fight by sending an aerial Chidori to Neji's blind spot and through his side, which, he acknowledged, with a swell of pride, undoubtedly wooed the audience. And despite the repercussions of chakra depletion, Sasuke stumbled over to Neji while the crowd celebrated his victory, and crouched beside his fallen opponent. "You underestimate yourself, you know," Sasuke muttered. Neji stared up at him through unblinking eyes, his long, dark hair splayed around him on the concrete ground. "This obsession with fate, or whatever, is holding you back." "You don't," Neji stammered with a scowl, but he didn't manage to finish his sentence because he winced with pain and gripped his side. It was quite a gash Sasuke made there. "I recently cut the set path bullshit out of my life, and look at where I am now, towering over you," Sasuke continued, not entirely sure what was driving him to speak to Neji Hyuga at all. Hayate was approaching, flanked by a team of medical personnel. "Nice speech," Neji sneered sarcastically while surveying Sasuke through a cold glare. Sasuke ignored the comment and extended a hand to Neji. "If you did the same, maybe the outcome will be different next time we fight." Neji shook his head in disbelief but, after a long pause, grasped Sasuke's hand, allowing his opponent to pull him upright. "I'll hold you to that last bit, Uchiha," he mumbled when he was back on his feet. Sasuke met Neji's gaze and smirked. Next, the two of them were examined by the medics. Sasuke, who had fewer casualties, only some bruises, muscle strains, and low chakra levels, was dismissed first. "Sakura Haruno and Kabuto Yakushi, please make your ways down to the arena for the 5th match," Hayate called out in the direction of the platform, his voice amplified for all to hear. "Shit, I'd better hurry," Sasuke thought, while increasing his pace to the tunnel, slowed by a slight limp. There was no way in hell he would miss a second of this next fight. Sakura was breathtaking to watch in combat, and if it was true she had been training with the legendary Sannin, Tsunade Senju herself, this match was sure to be a thrill. He maneuvered through the tunnel as quickly as his tired legs could carry him and nearly ran straight into Sakura at the top of the stairs. Sasuke's throat dried. Sakura certainly looked ready for the spotlight, with the way her fair skin and green eyes radiated an energized glow, not a hair on her head was out of place, and her red dress was in pristine condition. For the briefest moment, warmth crossed her features at the sight of him, but then her face hardened over. "Good job," she said, while offering a curt nod and weak smile. The words "good luck" tumbled out of Sasuke's mouth automatically, in a tone that mirrored hers. She passed by without a backwards glance. Sasuke's ears prickled uncomfortably as he watched her descend and disappear through the tunnel he just emerged from. On his way over to rejoin Kakashi and Naruto, Sasuke received several murmurs of praise and short rounds of applause from various clusters of spectators. When he arrived at his destination, he got 2 firm claps on the back. "I hate to admit it, but that was cool," Naruto said while failing to suppress his grin. "Executed perfectly," Kakashi added fondly, in reference to Sasuke's manipulation of his Chidori. "Thanks," he said with a small smile and then turning his attention to the arena, where Sakura was now exchanging words with Hayate and her soon-to-be opponent. There was a prominent scowl etched on her face. "Who's that she's fighting again?" I don't know, actually, Naruto said, while leaning forward and squinting at Kabuto, as if that would help him figure out who he was better. He's from Konoha, it appears, Sasuke added quietly. And he must be pretty good if he's made it this far. He honestly couldn't remember the guy's preliminary fight or ever encountering him before then in general. But there was something about his chakra signature that was a little off-putting. The fight commenced immediately, and as expected, Sakura put on a magnificent show. Her taijutsu maneuvers and brute strength seemed to have increased significantly over the month. Not even a minute into the fight, she demolished the arena floor with ease by driving her heeled sandal to it. I'm not sure who's my favorite anymore, Sakura or that blonde chick from the sand, Sasuke overheard Kiba say from a short distance away along the platform. Many of the audience members who overheard him chimed in with their votes. And Sasuke was no idiot, he knew they weren't only comparing Sakura and Temari's abilities. He gripped onto the metal rail, clenched his jaw, and ignored the rest of it. Around the time when Kabuto produced a water release technique, Niji, who was now patched up enough to walk, shuffled past where Team 7 was watching from. He paused to look out at the fight for a minute or two, including when Sakura managed to bend the trajectory of Kabuto's water release technique away from her simply by raising her arms. Collective ooze swept across the stadium. I didn't know she could do that. Naruto gasped, his jaw hanging open. Honestly, neither did I, Kakashi said while folding his arms. That girl is something all right. She's good, Uchiha, Niji muttered, briefly glancing at Sasuke, before turning away to rejoin his own team. Of course she's good, Sasuke silently agreed, feeling a tiny rush of pride. She's my training partner. His chain of thought stumbled to a halt. Or maybe was. The course of the fight, along with the arena's general ambience, turned serious when Sakura was caught in a genjutsu. Sasuke recognized the jujutsu straight away because Sakura's motions grew sloppier and more frantic, but some audience members didn't, as indicated by how they shouted with surprise at Sakura's abrupt change in caliber. He's smart, Sasuke admitted with a frown as Kabuto used a series of water-style techniques to prevent Sakura from freeing herself from his spell. Her expression became increasingly distressed as the seconds ticked on. Eventually she appeared to reach her limit and turned to face an enormous, advancing water beam. But instead of redirecting it as she did previously, Sakura slammed her gloved hands to the ground and produced an earth-style barrier, which blocked the water's path. The crowd roared excitedly, floored by her brilliant last-minute counterattack that both blocked the water and created an opening to free her mind from whatever illusion it had been trapped in. Nice one, Sakura-chan. Naruto yelled, while drawing his fist back in preparation to punch it into the air. You. But he silenced mid-sentence because, in the blink of an eye, Sakura punched Kabuto clear through the wall she'd conjured, with such tremendous force that his body limply flung through the air and ricocheted off the arena wall with a crack. She followed like a determined, hunting animal, got on top of Kabuto, and began throttling him. Anxious murmuring and cries followed as Sakura threw one ruthless punch after the other, bloodying Kabuto's face, shattering his glasses and probably breaking his nose. Sakura! Sasuke called instinctively, his heart hammering in his chest and his grip on the rail vice-like. What did he do to her? What got her like this? But there was no way Sakura could have heard him over the audience's commotion. She appeared to be speaking with Kabuto, who, now that Sasuke's attention was zoned in on him, looked smug. Shut up! Came Sakura's high-pitched screech, loud and clear over the noise, as she wound up her fist for what would likely be a finishing blow. But she never managed to go through with it, because Kabuto pushed her back and plunged a chakra-enhanced hand straight through her gut. It emerged out of her lower back in a splatter of blood. Before Sasuke had a chance to fully comprehend what he'd watched, he was forcefully pulled backwards and shoved into the wall behind him. His first impulse was to resist, but then he realized that his restrainer was Kakashi. For the briefest moment he was frozen, while his brain racked to piece the scenario together. Then, with a fierce pang of disbelief, the image of Sakura being impaled flashed across his mind and it no longer mattered what or who was blocking his path. Sasuke struggled against his sensei's hold while the curse on his neck burned and his Sharingan ignited. Get the fuck out of my way, he spat as the burning spread along his neck and his thoughts were clouded over by a primal need to hurt. He was distantly aware that the spectators were on their feet and screaming, and that Naruto was being pinned to the wall beside him by Guy. Kakashi didn't weaken his grip, however, so it took quite a number of excruciatingly long seconds for Sasuke to finally push through to where he had a proper view of the arena, although his sensei still had a firm hold on his arms. When Sasuke glimpsed her again, Sakura was emitting a scream of her own and it was throaty and gurgling through the blood freely spilling from her mouth. If Sasuke had the chakra for it, he would have blasted Chidori from his entire body right then and there. Instead he looked on helplessly, his chest so tight that it ached, and took in the pool of blood at her feet, the shredded remains of her dress dangling from her shoulders, and the dark, gaping hole in her abdomen where Kabuto had just withdrawn his hand. Fuck. No. No. He was on the verge of exploding under the pressure of his brimming rage and agony. But then his attention was pulled elsewhere. There were black marks creeping across Sakura's skin, seemingly growing from her forehead seal. In straight, angular lines, they crisscrossed along her neck and torso and down the lengths of her arms and legs. Her chakra was rolling wildly in a way that was very much alive. The other thing he noticed was the way she was gripping onto Kabuto's head, with her gloves laced through the hair at his temples and glowing with green chakra. She screamed again, but this time, Sasuke realized, it wasn't really a scream, but a battle cry. He couldn't breathe. Nor could anyone else in the vicinity, it seemed. The fight wasn't over. Sakura raised her shaking hands so that they were hovering over Kabuto's temples. Then a dribble of pink-tinged liquid spilled from his nose. Kabuto's eyes widened with panic and he motioned to scramble away from her. But he was too late. Because suddenly, to everyone's horror, the pinkish water was streaming from his nose, ears, eyes, and mouth, all while Sakura clawed her chakra-laden hands in a circular motion, as if she was dragging the liquid out of him. Sasuke felt like he was about to puke but couldn't pull his eyes away. What is that? Someone screeched, followed by affirmative, frenzied cries. But Sasuke, whose neck pain was fading and whose mind was sharpening, had an inkling he knew. As many audience members had just learned, Sakura was a water type. She was also a medical elitist who, surely, wouldn't have trouble pinpointing the exact areas where large quantities of water were located in the human body. And in this case, in Kabuto's head. Kabuto was cursing and screaming through the blood-stained water gushing from his face. He raised his arms towards his head, probably in an attempt to counter her attack and pull the water back into his brain arteries, or wherever exactly she'd extracted it from. After a long, messy struggle, he managed to get up on his feet and stumble back a few steps, finally freed from Sakura's lethal jutsu. She brought her chakra-enhanced hands to her abdomen and held her ground. Miraculously, the hole in her gut appeared to be closing. And Sasuke's head was spinning. The stadium was completely silent while Kabuto swayed on the spot and collapsed to the ground, head first into the puddles of blood and water, with his eyes rolled back in his skull. Hayate was having a conniption fit from his position nearby, practically plastered to the arena wall. Aye, he stammered, his eyes darting between Sakura and her fallen opponent anxiously. I declare Sakura Haruno the winner of this match. He sounded very pleased that the fight was finally over. The crowd erupted and there was a mixture of elation, relief, and the tiniest trace of fear in their cries. Was Kabuto dead? Was a thought likely on many of the spectators' minds. But it wasn't on Sasuke's. He was hardly thinking at all now that Kakashi had released his arms and there was nothing keeping him from scaling the railing and leaping down into the arena. Shock rocketed up his ankles when Sasuke landed because he didn't brace them properly with chakra, but he paid it no notice. I need to see her for myself. A group had already gathered around Sakura and Kabuto when he got there, primarily consisting of medical personnel. Sasuke shoved past them, feeling Naruto and Kakashi close on his heels, and projected pulses of threatening chakra along the ground to signal that everyone had better move out of his way. Several people shouted with surprise and one even toppled over, but Sasuke didn't care because it worked and he now had a direct path to Sakura. She looked at him with alarm but Sasuke didn't slow his stride. he drank in her appearance. First, Sasuke's eyes landed on her exposed lower torso, which bore a prominent, ugly scar but was closed. Those winding, black lines were still etched along her skin and channeling medical chakra through them, he sensed, and he quickly understood that they were what had healed her and saved her life. The remaining shreds of her dress had been discarded, so now she only had on a pair of tight, black shorts and a thick, black band around her chest to cover her breasts. The blood splatters popped out against her pale skin, and were especially concentrated on her arms, face, and lower belly. When he was only a few feet away, automatically, Sasuke pulled his new, sleeveless shirt over his head and thrust it to Sakura because he wasn't sure he could handle the sight of her body in this state any longer. And he couldn't stand her being there, in front of a sea of watchful eyes, in practically nothing. It made her look too fragile. She gaped at him, her green eyes alert and vibrant, and slowly reached for the shirt he was pressing to her collarbone. He noticed that crimson flecks were staining her hair. "Sasuke-kun," she breathed, and it was a broken sound. It didn't alleviate any of Sasuke's unease in the slightest. He wanted to say something but couldn't, so instead he brought a hand to her face and began carefully removing the blood from her chin, sponging it onto the black sleeves of his forearms, then wiping them on his own blue undershirt. The growing crowd around them stared in silence and did not interfere, although several medics were watching apprehensively. It was a matter of seconds until they jumped in. "Thank you," she whispered, and Sasuke's eyes traveled to hers and found that there were tears filling their lower lids. He remained voiceless and proceeded to drag his thumb across her bottom lip to remove another blood smear, ignoring the stinging in his tear ducts and holding in the sigh of relief welling in his throat. Chapter 34: The Outbreak. "Now could everyone please return to excuse me, could everyone except for Shikamaru Nara and please return to the stands so we can." Hayate's futile attempt to initiate the next third exam match went unnoticed. The arena's former competitive static was stifled as the spectators and participants took time to process the outcome of Sakura and Kabuto's fight. A crowd of spectators, medical personnel, and competitors had gathered on the arena floor to get a closer look at the girl who miraculously survived being impaled and then, somehow, with a technique no one had ever seen before, managed to win. Sakura herself was quite amazed she managed to pull off the feat, given how blinded by rage and close to death she had been. But the month of rigorous training with Tsunade combined with her determination to prove that she didn't need an affinity for the lightning element to use her mentor's prized technique body pathway derangement drove her to action anyway. She had prepared herself to use the technique to extract water from various parts of the human body. Given how the human body is 60% water, she had plenty of options. Her original vision for the technique was to, perhaps, force her opponents to cry, vomit, or even urinate, which would surely be embarrassing, debilitating, and hilarious. Pulling water straight out of an opponent's bloodstream, on the other hand, hadn't really been on her radar. Until the opportunity presented itself, that is. When Kabuto moved in to thrust his arm through Sakura's abdomen and deliver what he must have thought was the final blow, and with a smug, little grin dancing on his lips, she had wasted no time and went straight for the closest target. Which just so happened to be his brain. While she was whisked aside by the on-site medics, who had finally pushed their ways through the crowd, Sakura caught a glimpse of Kabuto's body, which was splayed out in a puddle of putrid, pink liquid. A few medics were turning his body over in search of vital signs. And, honestly, at this point, Sakura didn't know what they would find. If Sakura had a better handle on herself in her moment of unstoppable fury, she might have merely dehydrated Kabuto's brain only enough for him pass out, or perhaps experience some sort of incapacitating migraine. But she didn't stop in time for him to only experience those outcomes. A stroke, maybe, Sakura thought, swallowing hard, and tasting the remnants of blood caked in her throat. If I disrupted the blood flow to his brain, I induced a stroke. If that was the case, and if Kabuto really did get out of this alive, he would likely suffer from consequences in some way or another, whether they be physical, verbal, mental, or emotional. Or even some combination of them. "Allow me," one of the medics said softly, interrupting Sakura's train of thought. It took a moment for her to realize that the medic was referring to the bloody, gloved hand that Sakura was using to pump a soothing stream of medical chakra to her wounded abdomen. Thanks, Sakura muttered graciously and moving her hands and Sasuke's shirt away, which she had been clutching to her chest, for them to access the freshly healed injury. Although the creation rebirth technique had essentially patched up the hole, the area was still quite tender and could use all the care it could get. And Sakura, who was now relatively low on chakra, was most appreciative that the care it received was from someone else. She felt the black crisscrossing marks creep back up along her skin towards her forehead seal and disappear entirely. It was an unprecedented sensation she felt when the creation rebirth marks first appeared. There was no doubt that they hurt her, as had rapidly drained her chakra and life force, but at the same time, her dying body had craved them and summoned them almost entirely unconsciously. Tsunade touched down on the arena floor midway through Sakura's medical examination. She commanded the attention of everyone in the vicinity as soon as she got there, as a result of her far-reaching reputation and the way her lively, mighty chakra rolled. Nice, was all she said when she approached her student with her cheeks flushed and her red-painted lips curled into a smirk. Sakura grinned back and cocked an eyebrow. I told you I could use your technique, she thought with a swell of pride. Once the medics were finished with her, Sakura pulled Sasuke's shirt on over her head. She ignored the tinges and aches in her newly patched up midsection and smoothed out the surprisingly heavy, black material so that it aligned with her shoulders and draped over her body like a short dress. She could feel the enormous Uchiha crest stitched on the back rubbing against her shoulder blades. Somehow, her black waistband and medical pouch remained relatively intact through Kabuto's attack, albeit a little singed around the edges, so she fastened them around herself over Sasuke's shirt. Once it was on properly, Sakura instinctively sought out the shirt's owner and found that he, along with the other members of Team 7, had not ventured far and that they were forming something of a protective circle around her. Only now did Sakura realize just how many had congregated on the arena floor and were shouting in an attempt to catch her attention. There were a few journalists in the throng waving around their arms and notepads, probably desperate for a moment with her. Sasuke sensed Sakura's eyes on him after a few seconds and turned his head to look at her. And as his gaze followed the length of her body, all the way from the toe of her black boots to the high collar of his shirt, Sakura's heart began to pound. There really is something different about him, she admitted to herself, as she carefully drank in his easy stance and the warmth in his eyes. She wondered what he thought of seeing an Uchiha crest on her back. Naruto seemed to clue in that Sakura's medical exam had ended, and so, in 2 giant leaps, he advanced, stopping when he was only an inch away from her face. Sakura-chan, he breathed over the loud chatter around them, his blue eyes wide and brimming with tears. Why you scared me back there? You really did. Naruto seemed like he wanted nothing more than to wrap his arms around her, but was likely restraining himself because of her injuries. Sakura's chest tightened. Sorry, she muttered with a small smile and a tinge of guilt. She hated feeling responsible for causing her dearest friend to worry. I didn't really expect the fight to go that way. Some of the onlookers were undoubtedly listening in, so Sakura figured it'd be best to spare the details. It's apparent you've been training with a legendary Sannin, Kakashi chimed in, while shouldering his way through the crowd after Naruto. Sasuke followed with his hands in his pockets. There aren't many ninjas who could come out of that situation alive. Sakura's eyes darted over to where Tsunade was speaking with several medics and Jiraiya, who had finally joined the scene. And winning the fight like that? Naruto added with a huge, proud smile. Medical ninjas might be kinda gross but they're so badass. Sakura bit back a laugh, and the effort hurt her stomach and made her eyes water. The aloof, silent member of Team 7 shook his head and smirked at Naruto's remark. Sakura's eyes roamed the length of Sasuke's arm, from his bare shoulder, to the black sleeve on his forearm, to where her blood was still flecked on his hands and wrists. Her jaw and lips tingled. Excuse me. Everyone, please, Hayate's voice rang out once again. It would be great if we could get on with. Thud. Crack. Sakura snapped her head up and to the side, in the direction of the unexpected noise and where an ominous flare of chakra was building. But she couldn't see past the crowd surrounding her, and before she caught sight of the sound's source, screams erupted. "He's dead." He fell right out of the stands. Team 7 exchanged worried glances and moved ahead, maneuvering and flash-stepping through the swarm of bodies until they arrived at its edge. Sakura's eyes were pulled to the arena floor, near the wall, where the Kazekage's body was splayed in a pool of blood. The concrete surface was cracked below him. "What the hell?" Naruto gasped, and motioning forward, but Kakashi stuck out an arm to stop him from advancing. The murmurs and screams grew louder and louder, and Sakura's head was spinning. How did one of the strongest ninjas in the land go and fall out of the stands? What's happening? Then there was another blast of chakra, from somewhere behind them. The crowd whirled around and the shouting amplified. Sakura watched in horror as Kankuro, who had been hunched over the railing, collapsed over it and plummeted to the ground. "Kankuro, no!" Temari cried, and leaping over the rail after her brother. She pulled out her gigantic fan as she descended, and in 2 swooping motions, sent funnels of wind towards the ground, which cradled Kankuro's body right before it struck. He was suspended in the air for a brief moment, until the wind funnels vanished and he landed on the arena floor with a soft thud. Temari was at his side in an instant and she gripped his hand. The sleeve of Kankuro's black shirt slid up a few inches at the motion, revealing a pattern of dark, splotchy marks. Sakura's breathing hitched. "No." A sea of spectators flocked to the arena floor to examine the bodies, including the third Hokage, flanked by Ibiki, Enko, and a crowd of jonin, who kneeled beside the Kazekage with expressions of utter bewilderment. "It's that disease again," someone shouted. "When did they get it? They seemed fine moments ago." "Stop," Sakura thought, her throat constricting and extremities numbing over. "Everyone needs to get away from here." But she was paralyzed with shock and panic and failed to find her voice. She had a horrible feeling about this. While Naruto fidgeted beside her, trying to get a clearer view of the bodies through the mob, Sasuke mirrored Sakura's actions and froze to the spot. "Shit," he muttered as he bowed his head and slid his hand up to the base of his neck, cringing with discomfort. And then, out of absolutely nowhere and with a loud hiss, a thick, murky vapor filled the air, seeping in through the creases where the arena wall met the floor. In seconds, the air was thick and difficult to breathe, like they were being assaulted by fog machines. The crowd, now trapped in the arena, went mad. "That's it. That's how it's spreading. It's the vapor. Don't breathe. We need to get out of here." Hands and arms shot up to cover noses and mouths as the frenzied, chaotic scramble to the arena's exit began. Bodies slammed into each other, and several quick-thinking ninjas leaped back up into the stands as their means of escaping the foggy substance's assault. Sakura reflexively mimicked everyone else and clamped a hand over her mouth and nose and squinted her eyes. She felt numb with confusion and shock, and was still rather delirious after her exhausting fight. So, the Kazekage and Kankuro had the disease. It was hard to say just how long ago they had contracted it, because Sakura knew the disease started with a dormant, asymptomatic phase. They may have had it for hours or even days, depending on what Orochimaru and Kabuto fancied. But what the hell was with this vapor? Sakura had been extensively researching Orochimaru's awful disease for weeks on end, and through all of her investigating, there was never any indication of airborne transmission. If anything, she was certain that it had something to do with the mysterious puncture wounds that most of her patients had. This doesn't add up. "Sakura-chan. Let's move," came Naruto's muffled cry through the clamor and the palm he was pressing to his mouth. It was getting hard to see with the thick vapor pooling over her vision and the swarm of people scampering around like rabbits, but she could make out Naruto's bright eyes just ahead of her. It was difficult to think straight. "Come on," he added, while gripping her arm and dragging her ahead towards the exit. Sakura glanced back to make sure that the rest of their team was following, but Kakashi was nowhere in sight and Sasuke hadn't budged. In fact, he was still clutching his neck and hadn't motioned to protect himself from the vapor yet. "Sasuke!" Sakura yelled, which alerted Naruto that they weren't ready to plow ahead. They backtracked, pushing against the current of bodies, and nearly got trampled over entirely. They managed to get to Sasuke and Sakura promptly covered his mouth and nose with her free hand. His skin was hot and lined with sweat, and his own hand was still tightly clutching his neck, where Orochimaru's curse resided. Sasuke seemed to come to his senses when Sakura's hand met his face, as indicated by how he pulled his panic-stricken gaze up to look at her. They locked eyes and his stare carried a warning that Sakura understood but didn't want to believe. He's here. Sakura swallowed. It's happening. There will be a war after all. Naruto latched onto Sakura's arm again and nodded in Sasuke's direction. You good? He asked through his hand. His eyes drifted to the curse mark Sasuke was gripping and his expression softened with realization. Last time, Kabuto used a mass genjutsu on the arena, a temple of nirvana technique to put everyone to sleep, Sakura thought, her mind whirring. But it didn't seem like he would take that route this time around, since he was probably half dead somewhere beneath the stampede of feet. Another wave of screams met Sakura's ears, but they were of a different kind, not of shock or fear but of pain. She scanned the foggy, crowded area desperately, dreading what she might find. Everything was happening so fast that she wasn't sure what else she could take in. If it had been chaos and madness before, Sakura wasn't sure what to call it now. Because the vapor was thicker than ever, bodies were dropping, new ninjas were flocking into the already packed arena, and weapons were flying. Sakura's heart was thundering in her chest and she was feeling light-headed. It's happening now. She thought frantically, and feeling Sasuke's hand cover hers, signaling that she could move her own hand away from his face and focus on escaping. Wordlessly, the three of them started to run, laying low to stay out of the weapon's line of fire, while gripping onto the fabric of each other's shirts with their free hands and slamming shoulders with other escapees. Sakura glanced up towards the stands, seeking an opening they could get away through, but they were out of luck. A small army of ninjas clad in dark colors had gathered above them and were firing weapons down at the trapped crowd in the arena. Look out! Sakura cried and beckoning towards the enemies in the stands, while leading her teammates to the nearest arena wall. They stumbled after her, while sloppily dodging weapons and the fallen bodies. They reached the wall and Sakura threw her back against it, while Sasuke and Naruto did the same on either side of her, their chests rising and falling with each heaving breath they took and their shoulders pressed together. Her lungs ached as she was restrained to muted intakes of air behind her hand. The vapor was particularly thick where they were hiding, which provided partial concealment from the ambushers and a brief moment for them to catch their breaths. Enemy ninjas, who Sakura realized with a pang of dread were indeed from the Sound Village, were everywhere now, sending weapons at their trapped, vulnerable opponents who struggled to defend themselves from the attackers and the vapor at once. Bodies continued to drop, and chakra flares, similar to the flare Sutta projected when he first contracted the disease, lit up the arena. It is spreading here, somehow, Sakura thought while she watched another Konoha spectator collapse, as if in slow motion. Is it really because people are breathing this stuff in? The woman's long, black hair rippled behind her as she descended, her arms falling limply to her sides. Sakura scanned the woman's body and noticed a long, black senbon protruding from her right calf. A dribble of blood trailed down to her ankle, but something else caught Sakura's attention. The skin around the senbon was discolored. And darkening by the second. That was when it clicked. It's not the vapor. On a whim, Sakura bravely unclamped her hand from her face. Sakura-chan! Naruto hollered instantly, and snatching for her wrist, while Sasuke boldly pressed his free hand right over her mouth. What are you doing? He asked and his eyes were wide and bloodshot, probably from the debilitating curse mark pain he was enduring. It's all right, Sakura said, while carefully gripping Sasuke's fingers to tease them away from her face. She met her teammates' gazes and tried to reassure them though her own. No. Naruto interrupted. I won't let. This is just a diversion, she said, in reference to the vapor, and as confidently as she could. I know how these enemies think. Then what's happening to everyone? Sasuke asked, and glancing out towards the bodies, many covered in black splotches, that continued to fall. His grip on her face had slackened but he didn't retreat. trust me, she pleaded, enforcing conviction into her tone, while holding his gaze. Sasuke hesitated for a moment, like he was gauging her seriousness. Then he slowly, trustingly lowered both of his hands. Sakura took a daring breath and paused, analyzing and tasting the contents of the air as it traveled through her windpipe. The air was moist, cool, and tasteless, hardly different from Zabuza's mist. Sasuke appeared to be undergoing the same analytical process, testing out the air for any sign of detectable contaminants, viruses, or poisons. Naruto followed suit, also putting faith in Sakura's judgment, and removed his hand. She was right. Breathing in the vapor did not give them the disease. How did you know? Naruto asked, once he was confident that the air was safe. His eyebrows were scrunched and he was watching Sakura with amazement. Because it didn't add up, she answered simply, and checking their immediate surroundings for advancing enemies, but it appeared no one was onto them yet. I spoke to one of the sound ninjas in the second exam, Sasuke said quietly, while he also scoured the area with his eyes. He didn't seem to have enough chakra to activate his Sharingan. The one named Dosu. Naruto leaned in to hear his teammate better. He said he got the disease through a needle injection. He also said Orochimaru was working on transmitting it in other ways. Through weapons, Sakura said, as the gears turned in her head. He's transmitting it through Sanban, the Black Ones. It was quite a crafty diversion tactic Orochimaru and his cronies had brewed up. This vapor did precisely what it was intended to do: rouse fear and confusion, and distract everyone from the attacking army of sound ninjas. And not only that, but it made for easy pickings because it clouded everyone's vision. But why did only some of Sakura's diseased patients have puncture wounds? Well, if what Dosu told Sasuke held true, some of them may have been infected through syringes which, if injected properly, would have left hardly a trace behind, while others were infected through weapons like these. The masterminds behind this epidemic must have been toying with both methods. Sakura also had a hunch that Orochimaru and Kabuto had done this deliberately, this alternating between modes of transmission. Because they knew that Sakura and the other medical personnel at the hospital were onto them and investigating the disease. So, and she was certain of it, it was an attempt to mislead them into thinking that the puncture wounds were irrelevant. When, in reality, they were everything. Kabuto, you sly bastard. Sakura-chan, move. Alf. Sakura grunted as the weight of Naruto's body slammed against hers. He forced her to the ground and landed on top of her, painfully pressing her to the damp arena floor. But then, over his shoulder, she caught a glimpse of 3 black Sanban lodged in the arena wall, precisely where she had been standing milliseconds prior. Thanks. She gasped. She felt like she was going to be sick from the pressure on her tender midsection. But if it weren't for Naruto's quick thinking, she would have been infected with the illness. Rushes of gratitude and shock swam through her chest. We should go, Naruto said firmly while hoisting Sakura up and turning to Sasuke, taking an authoritative role. He clearly had the most stamina and awareness of their surroundings in the trio. Sasuke moved towards them, his face pale and lips pressed in a thin line. There was a combination of horror probably at how closely Sakura had come to being hit and determination to survive etched on his face. Lead the way, he said, surprisingly agreeably, and with a curt nod, while gripping the fabric of Naruto's sleeve with one hand and Sakura's wrist with the other. Naruto pulled his teammates forward, through the battlefield, where heaps of bodies and clashing ninjas surrounded them. Sasuke was forced to release his teammates on several instances to dodge incoming attacks and reciprocate them. But they always found each other in between, frequently touching each other's arms and torsos to make sure no one strayed too far. Sakura kept several poison-laced kunai in hand and scanned her foggy surroundings with wild eyes. The mist was rather disorienting, making their path to the exit difficult to determine, but they pushed forward anyways, and Sakura's adrenaline kept her on her feet and fighting. After endlessly searching for an escape to no avail, Sakura was starting to wonder if, perhaps, they were actually stuck in some kind of genjutsu. Given how many times they must have circled the place. A new opponent managed to land a punch on Sakura's face, snapping her head backwards and sending her to the ground. He was on top of her and winding up for another blow before either Sasuke or Naruto, who were occupied with another fight, had a chance to react. With hardly any chakra to work with, Sakura had to resort to using a gritty, hand-to-hand means of fending the enemy off. "Rough!" she cried, while bucking her knees and jabbing one of her hands to his gut, winding him. This gave her just enough of an opening to flip him over, straddle his hips, and drive one of her poisonous kunai clear through his arm. The ninja's eyes snapped open wide and he screamed as the fast-acting poison ebbed through his body and rendered him motionless. Sakura was about to leap off and rejoin her teammates, but she noticed something that held her there. On the enemy ninja's forehead protector was a sand gourd. "He's from sand," she thought, but before she could process exactly what that meant, the distinct whirring of nearing weapons met her trained ears. Sakura flipped backwards to safety as a barrage of black senbon struck the place she'd just been perched, including the body of the sand ninja who she had defeated. She stared in astonishment as the black splotches of the disease immediately began to seep out of the needles and across his skin, mixing with Sakura's poison and draining away whatever life force he had left. In that brief moment, 3 thoughts occurred to Sakura. 1. The disease was evolving. It was spreading more rapidly than she had ever seen it spread before. 2. Sand was involved in the attack. And 3. Sound didn't seem to care who they infected with the disease. Sakura felt a hand grip her upper arm and draw her away from the scene. "Let's move," came Sasuke's stern hiss from somewhere just above her ear as he pulled her towards Naruto. Her mind was racing and hands were trembling. "Guys," Sakura started, with the intention of warning her teammates that it appeared Sound wasn't their only enemy, but she was interrupted. "Look!" Naruto cried, and pointing to something on their right. There was blood smeared on his face and arm as a result of whatever battle he just took part in. Sasuke and Sakura turned as instructed and found Kakashi and Guy standing back to back, in the heat of their own fight. On either side of them were one Sound ninja and Gaara-sensei. "Sand is in on this too," Sakura breathed, as she watched Gaara-sensei advance towards Kakashi and Guy with weapons in hand, while shooting untrusting looks over his shoulder. The Sound ninja was sending weapons in all directions without any indication that he cared who they hit. "Yeah. This is exactly what I suspected," Sakura thought, her stomach turning. "This is a 3-way war." It was apparent that Naruto was itching to join in the fight, but Sasuke intercepted before he could. "Let's keep going," he said, and the words "we might just get in the way" went unsaid, but both Naruto and Sakura understood. Another arena wall came in sight moments later, and this one was recognizable. The competitor's platform was visible just above it. "I know where we are," Sakura exclaimed, because she recalled that, if they followed the platform to the end, it would lead them to the arena's exit. "Yeah," Naruto chimed in, and the 3 of them raced forward, through the trenches of diseased flesh, all while keeping their eyes and ears peeled for any sign of new attackers. Sakura followed her teammates with all the energy she could muster up. And she tried, with every ounce of willpower she had left, to stop herself from looking at the ground for too long in case there was a body laying there that she recognized. "Is he just trying to kill everyone?" she thought while tears welled up in her eyes and her throat constricted. This was worse than the terrorist attack on Konoha in her previous life, wasn't it? Because this time it was so much more complicated. Sound's disease knew no boundaries, it seemed, and after the open assassination of the Kazekage, whatever allegiance Sound and Sand had previously was surely severed. Were the 2 of them originally planning to attack Konoha together? Did Sound betray Sand at the last minute? What is he doing? Sakura whispered aloud, straining her lungs through the thick, murky air, just as Naruto and Sasuke's backs disappeared through it ahead of her. "Whatever excites me." She skidded to a halt, without alerting her teammates, her surprise paralyzing her in place. That voice. "It's more interesting now, don't you think?" "The dormant phase was such a bore, so I saw to it that the illness evolved to suit my wishes." The soft, icy tone came from directly behind Sakura. And she knew, without turning around, exactly whose voice it was, exactly who was standing there. "How are you faring, Sakura?" The voice drawled, while its owner steadily approached, his terrible, magnificent chakra signature engulfing her. Sakura emitted a soft whimper and squeezed her eyes shut, because she couldn't bear to look at him. She couldn't bear to acknowledge that this man would be impossible for her to kill, even if her future, Sasuke's future, and the future of the ninja world rested on it. She couldn't bear to acknowledge that her existence in this world, somehow, had prompted the creation of an epidemic that had taken so many lives. And that her time travel mission was going up in flames. I was quite impressed by what you did with Kabuto, Orochimaru said, his voice eerily calm. Intelligent girl, you are. And then, to her horror, Sakura felt a soft, smooth pressure trace along her outer ear, and she knew, before she snapped her eyes open, that it was his tongue. But as soon as the world around her came back into focus, Sakura wished she had never opened her eyes at all. Because right in front of her, on the ground, were two diseased bodies she recognized. A medic from the land of waves. And Hayate. Sakura's hand flew to her mouth. No, she cried softly, while gaping at the corpses in disbelief. They're dead. And it's because of me, she thought while a sob welled up in her throat. And there are probably so many others. Now, look at what you've made me do, Orochimaru tooted from somewhere behind her, a chilling sweetness in his tone. Sakura couldn't take it. She gritted her teeth, loaded all the chakra she had left to her hand, and coiled her body, preparing to turn and face the wretched serpent. Pow! What? Sakura spun around with surprise, nearly toppling over. What she got was an eyeful of green. Tsunade was standing directly behind Sakura with her fist raised, her cloak billowing behind her. Orochimaru, who had evidently taken quite a powerful blow from Sakura's mentor, was on the ground a few meters away. The vapor was lifting at a rapid pace and the surface below him was so demolished that it had caved in. Orochimaru, you piece of shit, Tsunade growled while cracking her knuckles and glaring murderously at her former teammate. Sakura's heart thumped against her chest and her body tingled excitedly. Thank God. Sasuke and Naruto returned to Sakura so forcefully that they both nearly collided with her. Not Snake Guy again, Naruto said while wrapping an arm around her. Sasuke took a protective stance in front of both of them. I let you out of my sight for 2 seconds, he mumbled to her over his shoulder, and Sakura could hear the ache in his tone. She never got the chance to respond, however, because 2 new figures entered the scene, Jiraiya and the 3rd Hokage. It's about time, Tsunade muttered, rolling her eyes. Let's wrap things up now, shall we? She paced ahead, towards Orochimaru, like a wildcat stalking prey. We'll lure him away from here, Sarutobi, who had shed his cloak and was adorned in his combat gear and armor, said to Team 7. Jiraiya shot them all a grin. You kids tidy up the place while we're gone, alright? He said, and beckoning to the rest of the arena, which was finally absent of mist, and where small clusters of sound and sand ninjas were surely lurking. Yes sir. Naruto said, and forcing some enthusiasm into his tone, though it was strained, and his hand shifted restlessly against Sakura's arm. Then Orochimaru, who undoubtedly realized he now had his hands full with 3 extraordinary new opponents, fled to put some distance between them. But Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Sarutobi were already in pursuit. A collective sigh of relief enveloped Team 7, but it was short-lived, because now that the vapor was gone, they were able to discern the other battles happening throughout the arena. The nearest one was Team 8 against 6 sound ninjas. They were outnumbered 2-1. Hinata-chan! Naruto cried, releasing Sakura and rushing over to meet his training partner. Hinata was visibly struggling, after having fought a challenging Chunin exam match not much earlier. Her clothing was scuffed and there were bruises and scrapes lining the exposed skin of her face and hands. Shino too was moving quite slowly after the recent fight with Temari. Kiba was on all fours, alongside Akamaru, and taking the brunt of the opponent's advances. Let's go, Sasuke said, and preparing to bound after Naruto. Sakura, is that you? Come here. Quick. Sakura's feet locked in place at the sound of the familiar voice. Ino. She replied, her voice cracking slightly, and swiveling her head around in search of her best friend. Sasuke, who had also paused and heard Ino's cry, roughly grabbed Sakura's arm and pointed to something behind her. "There," he said, and dragging her along. It took a moment for Sakura's focus to adjust to the sudden change in direction, but when it did, she spied Ino crouched on the ground in the trenches of debris and bodies. "Thanks," Sakura said in between pants while Sasuke guided her to her friend. When she reached Ino, Sakura found that she was wearing civilian clothes and her skin was extremely pale. Choji was lying at her feet, and Sakura's eyes were instantly pulled to the fresh wound in his leg from which a black senbon was protruding. The skin around it was stained a sickly gray and the stain was spreading. "I'll cover you," Sasuke said shortly and turning away to keep a watchful eye out for enemies. "Shit," Sakura cursed, dropping to her knees on Choji's other side and tearing off her medical pouch. Is there any way I can help?" Ino stammered while glancing between Sakura and her fallen teammate with wide, tear-filled eyes. If anyone knew how dire it was that Choji be treated immediately, it was Ino. She was still recovering, over a month later, and from a far milder version of this very illness. Sakura swallowed back her emotions to keep her head clear. "I'd stay out of this if I were you, pig," she said while fishing out a pair of thick tweezers. "You might be vulnerable to reinfection." "Right," Ino said while biting her lip and backing away slowly, though she seemed reluctant to. "Where's Shikamaru?" Sakura asked to divert their attentions, and because she was curious, while she carefully slipped the weapon out of Choji's leg with the tweezers. Dark blood oozed from the open wound. "Fighting on the other side somewhere. He's with Niji and Tenten, I think," she said, her blue eyes flitting around the arena in search of him. "Ah," Sakura said, and popping 2 anti-parasitic drugs into Choji's mouth, forcing him to swallow them while she loaded medical chakra to her hands, in preparation to manually tackle as much of the disease as she could. But it was dizzying, the simple act of summoning energy from the last of her chakra reserves. She was physically drained from her battle with Kabuto and emotionally drained from everything that happened after it. And her strength of 100 seal never caught a break to start replenishing itself. But she went on with the procedure anyways because there was no way in hell she was going to stand by and let a comrade die. Minutes ticked on as she coaxed her chakra through Choji's leg and produced a barrier to contain the parasites before they got anywhere near his vital organs. From behind her, she could hear Sasuke deflecting an onslaught of weapons with his own as prowling enemies took notice of them and drew closer. To Sakura's great relief, her barrier seemed to hold. Choji, who had been slipping in and out of consciousness, now had his eyes open and was emitting soft grunts. "You'll make it," Sakura chanted soothingly. But she wasn't through with him yet. If she didn't tread carefully and instill proper blood flow in his leg, a lower limb amputation was not off the table. Ino stared on keenly. But as the seconds passed, her gaze lingered somewhere behind Sakura, where Sasuke was engaged in combat. Sakura glanced over her shoulder and found that Sasuke only had one opponent left standing, but he seemed to be at a disadvantage, given his dwindling chakra levels and the number of other opponents he had just faced. "You holding up?" Sakura called and eyeing the opponent, a female sand ninja with several daggers in either hand. Sasuke was using his sword to deflect her advances, but given how he was still relatively new to the craft, at least, Sakura presumed he was, his movements weren't quite as fast as hers. He was evading her attacks at the very last second. He never caught a break to answer her. Sakura shot a panicked look to Choji, whose leg might suffer severe damage if he was left unattended for too long. But at this rate, Sasuke was also in great danger if no one backed him up. Ino got to her feet. "I've got this," she mumbled, while interlacing her fingers and extending her arms forward to stretch them. "Are you sure?" Sakura asked. Ino's body was still in delicate shape and she was technically forbidden from engaging in the ninja arts for at least another several weeks. Ino's lips quirked into a half smirk, her eyes blazing. "Don't worry about me, billboard brow," she said in a familiar, chiding tone. "Just look after my body for a sec." She pulled her hands together to form the seal for her mind transfer technique and aimed them at her target. Almost instantly, her body slumped sideways against Sakura, who caught Ino's waist with one hand, while the other tended to Choji. She positioned Ino so that she was leaning over her shoulder. The sand ninja froze as she was struck by Ino's technique and Sasuke blanched with surprise. "Hurry up. I've given you an opening," yelled Ino, from within the sand ninja's body. "Punch me, Sasuke-kun, damn it." He looked from Ino and Sakura to the sand ninja while realization slowly crossed his features. Then he followed through with his punch as directed, sending the sand ninja back first into the ground. Sakura noticed a small bruise sprout on the real Ino's jawline. "Kai!" The sand ninja cried from her position on the ground, indicating that Ino was returning to her original body. The whole ordeal worked seamlessly, because once Ino was safely back in Sakura's arms, both in body and mind, Sasuke delivered the finishing blow and knocked his enemy out cold. Ino roused and stumbled away from Sakura. She seemed a little disoriented, and was probably aching after taking Sasuke's vicarious punch to the face. "Thanks," Sasuke said with a polite nod while rejoining them around Choji's body. "You're welcome," Ino answered, and returning it, her face tinged pink, as she crouched back down on Choji's other side. Seconds later, Sakura finished destroying as many parasites as she physically could. She withdrew her hands, breathing heavily, and hoped she had done enough. Ino tried to initiate conversation with Choji after Sakura backed away and massaged her own temples. Her head was spinning and pulsing now. Sakura's eyes instinctively scanned the area, and it truly sunk in just how many casualties were around her, how many casualties she'd caused. Because Orochimaru was right in blaming her for this. The disease wouldn't have existed if she had never traveled back in time in the first place. Even if she saved Choji, there were so many others who she was too late for. Her lip began to tremble. "Hey!" Sakura glanced up and noticed Sasuke standing there, towering over her. She climbed to her feet, slightly wobbling, and wiped her eyes on the back of her hand. Sasuke had inevitably noticed her staring out at the dead. He placed a steadying hand on her back, in the center of the Uchiha crest on the shirt he lent her, and pulled her towards him. He moved her carefully at first, like he was testing the waters and gauging whether she would resist, and then his other arm was around her too, locking her in a careful hug. "It's not your fault," he said, from somewhere just beside her face, while Sakura buried it into his neck and released a shaky breath. And she couldn't think of a moment in either of her lives when she loved him more than she did then, in his arms, in the middle of the ruined Chunin exam arena. They still desperately needed to talk. She needed to properly apologize about divulging the truth of the Uchiha massacre so insensitively, and she needed to find out just what happened to him while he was away. But it would have to wait. After a few seconds, Sakura sensed Ino's eyes on her, and she bravely turned to meet her friend and rival's gaze, which she imagined would hold a mix of jealousy and fury. But that wasn't what she found. Ino was smiling, her eyes crinkling and her lips pursed together. What Sakura found instead was something like forgiveness and acceptance. Chapter 35 Time Traveler. Rookie 9, with the additions of Niji, Tenten, Karen, and one of her teammates from the grass village, congregated in the middle of the area in a relieved scramble. Sakura was thankful to find that, aside from the odd gash or bruise, no one appeared to be sustaining a serious injury. And, most importantly, no one else had contracted the disease. Aside from the corpses scattered across the arena floor, the vicinity was relatively cleared out. None of the Jonin or higher-ups were around, probably because they had focused their efforts on drawing enemies away from the arena, pushing them towards the outskirts, and flushing them out of the village. And everyone else, Sakura presumed, had either fled or died. Most of the group flocked to Choji to see how he was faring now that Sakura was through with her remedial procedure. Ino hovered over him like a protective sibling, with her arms outstretched to make sure he had some breathing room. As a disease survivor herself, Ino knew more than anyone what he needed most right now. Team 7 stuck close during the reunion, partly because Sakura had spotted a terrible stab wound on Naruto's arm and couldn't resist sharing a pulse of her healing chakra with him. She hardly had a shred of energy to spare, but she simply refused to risk his open wound getting infected before the fox's chakra had a chance to surface and patch it up. Sasuke watched the ordeal with his arms folded and an eyebrow raised, perhaps monitoring Sakura's chakra expenditure. Naruto seemed to have similar concerns. "Alright, I'm fine now, Sakura-chan," he said while shooting her a broad grin even though he clearly wasn't healed yet. His arm was still bleeding. "Thanks." Sakura began protesting, against her better judgment. But Sasuke interrupted her. "No, stop," he deadpanned. "The war isn't over. Stay sharp." Sakura pursed her lips and slowed her chakra flow. Her teammates were right, would probably pass out if she used much more of her chakra. Even her strength of 100 seal was nearly depleted. But, at the same time, not healing a friend contradicted her very nature. Especially now, with Sakura surrounded by a war that she had somehow created, among heaps of ninjas who had died because of something she did, and where everywhere she looked, her heart stung with guilt and self-loathing. So, if there was anything at all she could do to help her surviving friends and to cleanse her conscience, she would give everything she had. And so, stubbornly, she kept her hands locked around Naruto's arm until his injury was reduced to a scab, despite her teammates' looks of concern and agitation, in Naruto and Sasuke's cases respectively. "I can handle myself," Sakura shot back defensively, anticipating another critical remark. But instead, Naruto smiled a knowing, crooked smile. "We know that," he said. "But we just want to help." Sakura opened her mouth to argue, but he continued. "We know you're a medical ninja and you just want to heal people, but even medical ninjas need help, you know? And that's where the rest of Team 7 comes in." He extended his other hand and patted Sakura's forearm. "We've got your back." Caught a little off guard by Naruto's words of support, Sakura stared at him through wide eyes and properly took in the scrapes that lined his jaw and the flecks of dirt and blood that made his determined, blue eyes appear brighter than ever. Her heart clenched and her gaze shifted to Sasuke. Wearing his blue undershirt, a reminder that he had literally given her the shirt off his back. He was watching the two of them expectantly with his eyebrows furrowed. "It's not your fault. I don't know what I'd do without you two," Sakura whispered, succumbing, while pulling her hands away from Naruto and fighting the tears accumulating in her lower eyelids. "Neither do I," Naruto said with a cheeky, signature grin that warmed Sakura's heart. Sasuke rolled his eyes but failed to hide his smirk. From there, Team 7 dispersed to mingle with and check on the others. Naruto joined Team 8, Neji, and Tenten, and Sasuke spoke with the group members least familiar to them, Karen and her teammate, likely to size them up and gauge their allegiances. Sakura made a beeline for Choji and his teammates and was grateful to find that his condition was improving. After a few minutes of light-natured banter, Sakura caught eyes with Naruto and Sasuke through the crowd, and understood that it was time to get moving. The war wasn't over yet. She rose to her feet and cleared her throat. "Hey guys. Maybe we'd better," she began, but her voice faltered. Something was off. There was an energy building from below their feet, faint at first, but increasing rapidly. A hush fell over the group as the others undoubtedly sensed the energy. Weapons were drawn, Akamaru sprang down from Kiba's collar with his teeth bared, and both Neji and Hinata activated their Byakugan. The energy was everywhere, behind them, beside them, below them, and Sakura didn't know where to aim the poison-laced kunai poised in her hand. That was when she felt tiny, granular specks tickle against the bare skin above the hem of her black boots. Her stomach churned. "Bugs?" she thought while she directed her gaze to the ground. But she didn't find any bugs. Instead, she noticed flecks of golden dust swirling around her ankles. "No. Not dust. It's..." A manic laugh echoed through the arena. Sakura's blood ran cold as her head snapped in the direction of the sound, the arena's edge below where the Kage had been seated. Her breathing hitched and she felt the others shift anxiously. She spied two people crouched low among the dead. Temari was one of them, her blonde hair visible through the chaos, her face tear-stained, and her enormous fan beside her on the ground. It didn't take long for Sakura to realize that the body she was mourning over was her brother's, Kankuros. The disease killed him, Sakura thought, as dread pooled in her stomach, recalling his gruesome tumble from the stands before the vapor was unleashed. Temari might have saved him from a perilous fall, but he was no match for Orochimaru's illness. No, Sakura breathed, her hand flying up to her mouth. She didn't have much time to linger on his death, however, because the other person crouching among the bodies emitted the same cold, dangerous laugh she had heard earlier, and captured her attention. There was no mistaking his identity with his mop of red hair and the giant sand gourd fastened to his back. It was surprising that he had managed to stay below the radar until now. But Gaara was no longer hiding. And something was wrong with him. His back faced them, and he was perhaps unaware of the onlooking group. Below him was a mangled body covered in a white and blue robe. The body of the Kazekage, his father. His father's death triggered something in him, Sakura thought, her throat drying and brow lining with perspiration, as she took a frightened step backwards. There's no doubt about it. But what did it trigger? Sakura had heard of the unusual relationship between Gaara and his father in her former life when she knew Gaara better. It had been a rocky one, to say the least. His father had ostracized Gaara and stunted his emotional growth. Did Gaara react this way when his father died in my old life? Sakura wondered as Ino's shoulder grazed against hers. Did the Kazekage's later death mean that he had tormented Gaara for longer? Or perhaps they managed to resolve some of their differences in his extra few weeks of life? Regardless, whatever the state of their relationship had been, the Kazekage's death seemed to affect Gaara for the worse. He stood with his back to them, his shoulders hunched and his hands balled into fists. Slowly, he raised one of his arms, palm up, and sand trickled out of the gourd on his back, swirling and twisting in a snake-like manner. I have a bad feeling about this, Sakura gulped as the coiling sand crept towards one of the nearby corpses and wrapped around it, concealing the corpse from view. Gaara closed his fist and the sand imploded in a splatter of blood, crushing the corpse in a gruesome burst. What? Kiba barked and there was a collective wince. Temari was on her feet. Stop it, Gaara! She cried, all color draining from her face, her eyes wide and panic-stricken. But when he ignored her, she turned to the group instead, her gaze locking on Sakura's. Don't just stand there. Everyone, run! There was a brief hesitation, where everyone exchanged nervous glances and held their weapons a little higher, assessing whether this was an enemy they might stand a chance against together. But then Gaara craned his neck around and gave them a clear view of the toothy smile plastered on his face and the bloodlust radiating from his eyes. The satisfaction in seeing his father dead was etched all over his face. And so was his need for more death. Run! Temari shouted again, more urgently, but they were already moving. Sakura couldn't remember exactly when her legs started pumping her towards the arena exit, though it probably coincided with when the deeply rooted, primal instinct to flee from certain death kicked in. She was nowhere near at a capacity to take on an enemy like that, an enemy that hosted an untamed tailed beast, and she highly doubted that any of the others were either. Even Niji, who was sprinting nearby Sakura, smartly seemed to recognize that he was in no state to survive a fight with this opponent. But Gaara was in pursuit. Giant tons of sand slithered across the ground, crushing everything in their wake: corpses, uprooted tiles of the arena floor, and they stalked towards Gaara's next victims, Rookie 9 and company. Ino screamed from somewhere to Sakura's left. Shit! Distracted from her escape, Sakura whipped her head around to gauge the safety of her friend, but that was when one of the sand tongues took hold of her ankle and yanked Sakura to the ground. She twisted around and her back hit the arena floor hard. Before she could gain her bearings, her body dragged painfully towards Gaara, Sasuke's shirt riding up her back. Sakura! Sakura-chan, no! Called voices that sounded distinctly like her teammates, but she couldn't respond. Sakura focused on pumping all the chakra she had left to her arms so that they might anchor her to the floor. But the sand's grip was tightening painfully and creeping up her calf. She briefly caught sight of Gaara's empty, pale eyes ahead of her and read his intentions. And realized that this was it. But then a flurry of weapons embedded themselves along the tongue of sand in a trail that led all the way up to its owner. And it forced Gaara to deflect the attack with his sand, which distracted him enough to loosen his grip on Sakura's leg. She managed to wriggle free while the sand lost its shape and pulled to the ground in a lifeless heap. "Don't you lay a hand on her," snarled a protective, female voice. And, to Sakura's surprise, it was Karen who stepped forward, wearing a t-shirt that was much too large for her, a combat skirt, and fishnet tights, her wispy, red hair falling over the grass village head protector secured around her forehead. Sakura stared in awe while someone from the group pulled her up and out of the sand's reach. Gaara froze for a moment, seemingly dumbstruck by Karen's boldness. Then Karen, who gained some confidence over his hesitation, raised her weapon-laced fists to fire another round. "No, Karen, move!" Sakura yelled, because she knew that it was only a matter of seconds before Gaara came to his senses and launched his next assault. And he did. But he did something entirely unexpected. Gaara turned to Hinata, who had been standing along the edge of the group, next to Shino, and who was relatively separated from the others now that they were gathered near Sakura. "No!" Sakura thought in horror as the sand gripped Hinata's legs and pulled her to the ground. It wasn't until she emitted a panicked gasp that the others took notice of the attack. It appeared Gaara's tactic was to prey on the weak. Both Sakura and Hinata were completely drained from their fights. And what happened next was a blur. The sand imploded around her legs. Hinata emitted a petrified scream and collapsed to the ground, blood soaking through the golden sand. Then it was a whole other ball game. Rookie 9, along with Niji, Tenten, Karen, and her teammate, advanced with a vengeance, with Naruto and Niji at the front line. They charged pell-mell at Gaara, but Sakura's instincts pulled her elsewhere to Hinata, whose legs, or whatever was left of them, were still covered in bloody sand. Her face was as white as a sheet, and her soft moans drowning out everything else in the world. Sakura stumbled towards her friend. She had virtually no chakra left to offer, but that didn't stop her from using every remaining ounce of her energy to try to summon something. Then there was a blast. It sent Sakura hurling backwards before she reached Hinata. The back of her head struck something hard and she felt the texture of the paved arena floor against her back, the scene before her slipping in and out of focus. Naruto was there, in the middle of the arena, enraged, and surrounded by a swell of red chakra. He was on all fours, squaring himself up with the enemy, fangs bared. Gaara was backing away, motioning to retreat to the forest. The last thing Sakura saw before she fell unconscious was the back of Naruto's orange jacket disappear into the trees, in pursuit. Sakura felt panicked before she even opened her eyes. She was dizzy, her body was aching, but she was alive, albeit barely, thanks to whatever shred of chakra she had left in her body. It took a surge of effort for her to pull her eyelids apart and take in her surroundings, and an excruciatingly long time for her to make out the trees overhead and the person looming over her. "Sakura? You up?" asked a familiar voice. She failed to answer, so she just blinked and winced as Kiba's face came into focus. It appeared they were somewhere in the forest on the village's outskirts. Explosions sounded in the distance, vibrating the mossy forest floor below. "Take your time getting up," Kiba said, and leaning back on the balls of his feet. He was clearly concerned, but it was also clear that he wasn't a nurturing type. "We haven't seen any enemies for a while, so we should still have a couple of minutes." Sakura nodded slowly, which only caused her head to throb, and carefully shifted her arms along the ground so that she could use them to prop herself up. And when she did, her entire body felt like lead and the head rush forced her to pause. She was so uncoordinated that she might as well be inebriated, with the addition of being in pain all over. Kiba bounced a little on the balls of his feet, apparently anxious. "Water?" he offered, and holding out a flask. Sakura stared at him blankly, taking in his civilian attire and beady, brown eyes. He chuckled nervously and averted his gaze to the ground. "Sorry. I honestly don't know what to do with you. If it weren't for Shikamaru knowing some basic first aid, I don't think you would have made it." "Thanks," she breathed, and reaching a trembling hand towards the flask. She was parched. And now she was acutely aware that she was suffering from some kind of head injury. The back of her skull hurt like a bitch. Sakura took a generous mouthful, stray droplets trickling down her chin. The water was warm and tasted funny, but it would do. How long was I out? She asked when her voice was a bit steadier. He shrugged, his stance relaxing slightly now that Sakura had a little more life in her. Only like 15 minutes. You haven't missed much. She pulled herself up into a proper sitting position, ignoring how much the motion made the world spin. Where are Naruto, Hinata, and the others? She asked, remembering her teammate disappear in a swarm of the nine-tailed fox's chakra. Dunno, Kiba answered quietly, the nervous edge returning to his voice. We all got separated when Naruto and Gaara started tearing up the place. And then more enemies flocked in, sand ninjas I think, so we were forced to run. Right now it's just you, me, Shikamaru, and Akamaru. They're taking watch. Did everyone else get away? Sakura asked, unsure whether she was ready for his answer. I think so, he said. Everything happened pretty fast. But I saw Ino dragging Hinata out of there in search of medical attention. His voice caught. So I think she'll be okay. He forced a smile, but it didn't mask the fear in his tone. And Sakura felt it too. Because if Ino and Hinata didn't find medical attention fast enough, Hinata would have bled out. Or maybe the two of them were attacked and defeated, considering the vulnerable states they had been in. Her heart clenched and she willed herself to stop imagining other outcomes before she went utterly mad. At least Naruto seemed to be on the offensive. But trouble often followed when he lost control to the nine-tailed fox. And Sasuke, Karen, and everyone else, where did they end up? Shikamaru popped his head around the trunk of a nearby tree with Akamaru at his side. You're awake, he said with a relieved sigh and meeting Sakura's gaze. You okay to move on your own? There's a group closing in. Akamaru barked in agreement while Kiba sprang to his feet. Sakura bit back her groan. Yeah, she said, while taking Kiba's extended hand and using every ounce of her strength to stand. I'll manage. And thanks for saving me, you guys. It seems like I had a pretty close call. Don't thank us yet, Shikamaru said seriously, and glancing over his shoulder. Despite his warning of approaching danger, Sakura appreciated his authoritative air amidst the chaos. It was no wonder he got promoted to Chunin so early last time around. Where are they coming from? Kiba asked and turning his attention to Akamaru while keeping a steadying hand on Sakura's lower back as she regained balance. Akamaru barked 3 times and Kiba nodded, sniffing the air. All right. Sounds like our best bet is to head west. Come on. Roger that, Shikamaru said, and then the 3 of them broke into a jog. Kiba led the way and Shikamaru took up the rear, covering Sakura, who was the weakest link. The movement was brutal and made Sakura feel like she was going to vomit, but her adrenaline kept her going. She stumbled a few times but, for the most part, concealed how much she was hurting. She didn't want to be any more of a burden to Kiba and Shikamaru than she already was. I wish Naruto and Sasuke were here, she thought, her heart rate quickening at the thought of her missing teammates. Surely they would have scooped her up and done everything in their powers to bring her to safety. Not that she didn't appreciate what Kiba and Shikamaru had done for her. She just missed her boys, who she was far more comfortable revealing her weaknesses to. It turned out the war zone was taken to the forest. Trees had fallen and craters had formed across the terrain. Whiffs of smoke and death wafted through the air and there was no end to the explosions shaking the earth. My God, Sakura breathed, taking in the destruction with wide eyes. Better here than in the village, Shikamaru said, noting Sakura's shock. Hopefully this means most battles are out here, away from the civilians. True, Sakura answered, but she didn't feel much relief. Instead, she thought of the civilians from the land of waves who traveled all the way to Konoha to watch her match, many of whom probably got caught up in the fray and died. She thought of the medical ninja who helped her set up her makeshift hospital there, and whose body now lay in the Chunin exam arena. And now Hinata, and probably others, were in great danger. What about Choji, Ino, Sasuke, and the rest who were in weak states to begin with? Sakura's stomach twisted painfully. She was fortunate to be with Kiba and Shikamaru, who had not taken part in third exam matches, but even then, they had probably been forced to expend huge amounts of chakra to compensate for the others. But Sakura didn't have much time to wallow in her guilt. Because they were attacked. A weapon whirled past them and struck a nearby tree trunk. Shit! Kiba cried and skidding to a halt. Whoever was onto them was too close to flee from. And so the three of them spun around and lowered into battle stances, Kiba getting down on all fours. Sakura was exhausted, her nerves were on fire, and her will to fight muted. But when four masked sound ninjas emerged from the trees, she gritted her teeth and dipped her hands into her weapon pouch. Lay low! Shikamaru hissed, while he directed his attention to the two enemies on the right. Kiba took the two on the left, and Akamaru stayed by Sakura's side, occasionally stepping in to help out his master. Sakura did as instructed and stayed back, firing weapons from a distance to aid her comrades, despite how hard it was for her to lift her arms. But even with her help, it was apparent that they were in trouble. Kiba and Shikamaru confirmed her suspicion that they had used up massive amounts of chakra because they were both resorting to taijutsu-based attacks. Their opponents were fast, skillful, and smart enough to realize that Sakura was the most vulnerable member of the squad. At one point, an opponent of Kiba's managed to fire 3 black senbon at Sakura. Thankfully she dodged them, though sloppily. One of the disease-laced needles came disturbingly close to grazing her leg. She could hear fabric ripping as it tore her clothes. Her panic heightened. That was when Sakura realized that Kiba's other opponent was raising his arm to lodge a black senbon in Kiba's shoulder. Kiba had been distracted by Sakura's close encounter. Look out! She cried, but then something strange happened. The attacking sound ninja was hit right in the throat with a kunai that seemed to come out of nowhere. Huh? Kiba gasped and springing back while his opponent dropped to his knees and let out a gurgling scream. Shikamaru also retreated to Sakura's side, his jaw agape. Then the source of the attack became apparent when one of Shikamaru's opponents fired knives at his allies left standing. It was a betrayal. Get out of here! The traitorous sound ninja yelled to them. Wait. I recognize that voice from somewhere, Sakura thought, but she couldn't put a face to it. Nor was she about to turn her back on him, in case this was a ploy. But then the sound ninja removed his mask. It was Dosu. His skin was sunken and gray, a remnant of the disease Sakura saved him from in the forest of death, no doubt, but he was sturdy on his feet, and there was steadfast determination in his dark eyes. This is payback. Now go. Well, that was lucky, Shikamaru mumbled and rubbing the back of his neck. They had ventured further west and found a temporary shelter to pause and catch their breaths, thanks to the brief opening provided by Dosu. They chose a small pit below a protruding stone and scrambled inside. They wouldn't have long to rest, but any amount was better than nothing. I'll say, Sakura answered and massaging her aching arms, but it was no use. She was in desperate need of a medic's attention and she didn't have the resources to help herself. How did you know that, sound ninja? He asked with mild interest. Kiba was perched in one of the trees overhead, on the lookout for more enemies. She chuckled weakly. Long story, she said. But I saved his life once, on a whim. I guess he owed me one. Nice, Shikamaru said with an approving nod. But then his eyes narrowed. What's that? He asked and pointing to something just ahead of them on the ground. Huh? Sakura, whose senses were quite dulled, looked to where he was beaconing. A white mass was growing out of the forest floor. It looked highly unnatural among the green and brown twigs and brush. A jutsu? Sakura thought, while she and Shikamaru rose to their feet and Kiba leaped down to join them. It wasn't until the mass had fully emerged from the ground did Sakura recognize it. A white slug, about the size of a demon wind shuriken, had fabricated. And Sakura's heart soared. Thank God. Sakura, said the creature in a nasally voice while it turned its antennae in her direction. Stay where you are. Yes, Lady Katsuyu, she replied with a grin while relief washed over her. It was a form of Tsunade's slug summon, which meant that Sakura's mentor was probably nearby. Kiba and Akamaru crinkled their noses. You have connections with the strangest people, Kiba said. Shikamaru looked on with surprise but seemed to trust Sakura's judgment to do as the slug instructed. And, surely enough, Tsunade arrived moments later, her golden locks and dark green cloak billowing behind her. Her frenzied stare locked on Sakura's. Tsunade-san. Ah. You idiot, the woman said, while striding forward and forcing Sakura into a seated position. Shikamaru smirked knowingly and Kiba was unusually silent. He was ogling at the gorgeous newcomer and probably didn't have a clue who she was. Wordlessly, Tsunade clamped her hands down on her student's shoulders and began transferring chakra to her, and there was an urgency in her movements. Sakura figured that whatever battle she was just engaged in wasn't over yet and that she needed to get back. But that didn't stop Sakura from relishing in the feeling of fresh chakra entering her body, pumping energy through her veins, strengthening her organs, and bringing her life force back to the surface. Though, she was curious as to why Tsunade abandoned her own fight to seek her student out. Before she had a chance to inquire, Tsunade cut in. You need to be alive, she said curtly, while moving her hands to the base of Sakura's skull to heal the injury there. This is biological warfare and you're one of the few who might play a role in ending it. Right, Sakura answered in understanding. She wasn't about to refuse this extra, life-saving boost either way. Next, Shikamaru asked what else Tsunade knew of the war and how Konoha seemed to be faring. Well, it seems we've managed to flush out most of the village, she said, her voice stern. Jiraiya and the third were holding their grounds against Orochimaru when I left, but I'd better rejoin them soon. A short silence followed, wherein more distant explosions could be heard and the ground trembled beneath them. When Sakura was patched up to Tsunade's liking and she really did feel like a whole other person after the procedure, now that she had a robust supply of chakra and virtually all of her pain had dissipated, the Sannin stood, preparing to take her leave. Thank you, Sakura said, also standing. She suspected that Tsunade had provided her with more chakra than she needed. Tsunade had even replenished a small reserve of chakra in Sakura's strength of 100 seal. Sakura wondered how much supply the woman had left for herself. Use this chakra wisely, was Tsunade's resolute answer. Yeah. I will. Tsunade turned on her heel, preparing to bound away through the trees, but then she stopped. Oh, she said, and reaching into her cloak. I just remembered. She turned to Sakura with a scroll in hand. She held it out. I believe this is yours. Sakura raised her eyebrows with surprise but froze when she processed what exactly she was looking at. It was the time travel scroll. What? She gasped and glancing down to her weapon pouch, where she had been hiding it, disguised as another scroll. She found a huge tear along the bottom of the pouch. It was entirely empty. Damn it, she thought. It wasn't my clothing that the Black Sanban ripped. During the fight with the Sound Ninjas, it seemed Sakura had been far too delirious to notice her weapon pouch empty itself all over the forest floor. And, worst of all, she had been so weak that her substitution jutsu slipped, leaving the scroll exposed in its natural state. This was the risk she took by carrying the scroll on her person, but she hadn't been able to rationalize leaving it somewhere out of her reach, especially now that the village was under attack and Orochimaru knew where she lived. Why yeah, it is mine. Thanks, she said, her insides squirming and head spinning, as she took the scroll from Tsunade. I guess I should be thankful that she came across it instead of an enemy. But did Tsunade know what it was? Her serious stare gave Sakura no indication that she did. Sakura held her mentor's gaze and vaguely noticed Shikamaru's eyes flicker from the scroll to her forehead. Either way, her speculating would have to wait until later because that was when she sensed Orochimaru's chakra. The others stiffened, clearly sensing the chakra too. Oh no, Sakura groaned and casting a quick substitution jutsu on the scroll. She transformed it into the first thing she could think of, a piece of fabric, something firmer and more durable than its former underwear disguise, and shoved it into her boot. What the hell? Tsunade growled while charging chakra to her fists and leading the way towards the source of the disturbance. Sakura followed suit, also channeling energy to her hands. She was clean out of weapons now and would have to rely on her natural defenses from here on out. Shikamaru, Kiba, and Akamaru followed, though a little hesitantly. It would be difficult to be of much use in the fight that likely awaited them. Not long into their search, the group ran into a familiar face. Tenten burst through the trees ahead, running at full speed. Her eyes were wide and terror-stricken, and her arms were riddled with bruises. She was sprinting so frantically that she almost collided right into Tsunade. "Oh, oh!" she cried, tears forming in her lower eyelids at the sight of them all. "Thank goodness you're all here." She bowed down, placing her hands on her thighs and sucked in deep gulps of air. "What's going on?" Tsunade asked and peering through the trees over Tenten's shoulder with narrowed eyes. That was when Pakken, Kakashi's dog summon, leaped down from a nearby branch. "Ah!" he exclaimed. "It's just who we needed." "There's a lot happening," Tenten explained. "Pakken and I were trying to find help." "Come with us," Pakken added and beckoning in the direction from which they came with his nose. "We must hurry." Sakura exchanged confused looks with Shikamaru and Kiba and made a break for it through the trees, following Tsunade, Tenten, and Pakken. "What on earth is this about?" she thought, half wondering if this was some kind of trap. But if Tsunade trusted them, she suspected that she could too. About 5 minutes later, they arrived at a small clearing covered in bodies. "Holy shit!" Kiba breathed while he scouted out the area. "Someone went to town on these guys." Based on Sakura's quick survey of the scene, it appeared that most of the defeated ninjas, who all appeared to be enemies, had severe deformities, badly broken and twisted limbs and wrung necks. But they weren't what held her attention. No, Sakura's focus was pulled in 2 other directions. Shino was there, hoisting Karen up, who appeared to be badly wounded. And Sakura's throat dried at the sight of a puncture wound in her arm and the blackness tinging the skin around it. Shit. She's been infected. She also noticed another figure, hunched among the bodies. The person was hard to make out because they were surrounded by a swell of crackling, purple chakra. "That's not Orochimaru. Tsunade-sama. Can you please tend to Karen?" Sakura squeaked as she took a hesitant step towards the figure. "Go on," was Tsunade's response, and she didn't need to tell Sakura twice. Crap, Sakura thought, her heart rate quickening, as she tiptoed through the wreckage. The figure stirred, detecting her presence, and stood up. She already knew it was Sasuke and was horrified, but unsurprised, to find his skin lined with the black, splotchy marks of Orochimaru's curse, free from the confines of Sakura's Fujihoan seal. His hands were covered in blood and his eyes, which were trained on the body nearest him, were wild and unfocused. It became apparent who the source of the slaughter was. "Careful," warned Tenten, who approached Sakura's side, taking a position slightly behind her. Shino tried to subdue him and nearly got his arm torn off. "He's lost control." "He killed all these guys?" Kiba asked, his eyes widening. He and Shikamaru had joined Sakura on her other side. Tenten nodded, biting her lip. "We were losing badly, but then he turned into this and took out all of our opponents." "He's low on chakra," Sakura muttered, and observing how faint his signature was. "He must have expended way too much, perhaps even tried another Chidori, leaving him no other option but to rely on the power of the curse." She took a determined stride forward, ignoring the others' shouts of protest, confident in that moment that she could subdue him somehow. He needs to calm down, Sakura thought, while biting back the ache she felt seeing him like this. This was likely his first time completely losing himself to the curse in this life. "Sasuke," she said, and drawing nearer. She had an idea. But Sasuke didn't acknowledge her, and instead, kept his eyes trained on the body at his feet. "I can do this. I can help him fight the curse." "Sasuke," she repeated with more conviction, and trying not to think about how sick the wretched chakra spiraling around them made her. A gentle wind, created by the purple vortex, tugged at her hair and clothes. "I'll give him some of my chakra," she thought purposefully and extending her arm towards him, privately thanking Swanda for sharpening her skills in chakra transfer during her month of training. With more chakra in his system, in theory, he wouldn't have to rely on the curse. But Sasuke struck her arm away, without looking at her. Sakura winced and withdrew it. It looked like she would have to try a new tactic. Fine, she snarled, with stubborn perseverance. She channeled her strength of 100 chakra down her body, right to her feet, and sent out a threatening snap of it through the ground. It rustled the nearby trees and rivaled the terrible energy Sasuke was emitting himself. Now this caught his attention, and in a flash, Sakura felt her body lifted into the air, Sasuke's hands secured around her throat. Tenten screamed and Shikamaru and Kiba were shouting. Sakura failed to produce a sound and struggled not to succumb to her fear of Sasuke's immense power. He reeked of Orochimaru. But he isn't Orochimaru. He needs my help. She met Sasuke's Sharingan-lit eyes for a fleeting second and his expression instantly changed. His body froze, his eyes widening and lips parting, as his guard visibly dropped. Sakura used this opening to drive her heel into Sasuke's chest, sending him backwards into the dirt, skidding along the ground, and forcing her release. Sakura collapsed to her knees and clutched her throat, gasping for air. But when the others rounded on her, she waved a dismissive hand and halted them in their tracks. Sakura, who was rather dizzy from the recent reduction in oxygen intake, made a beeline for her teammate, who was still on his back and hadn't moved an inch. She dropped to her knees again when she was beside him, noting how defeated he looked now, with his bated breathing and eyes squeezed shut. With no delay, Sakura placed her hands on his lower torso and began pumping her chakra straight into the center of his own chakra circulation, careful not to cause him any discomfort. Sasuke's eyes snapped open and they shifted from her hands to her face. She sighed inwardly at their familiar shade of black. "Sakura," he said gruffly, his lips barely moving. "It's good to see you," she replied quietly, focusing on the chakra transfer while her eyes filled with hot tears. God, how this guy frustrated her. For all she knew, he hated her right now, and they were on the verge of some kind of blowout. She was still bottling up her own resentment towards both him, for his irrationally angry response to her disclosing the truth of the Uchiha massacre, and towards herself for her insensitive manner of disclosing it. They were silent for a minute or so, while Sakura filled him with her energy. Out of the corner of her eye, Sakura noticed the others back away towards Tsunade, Karen, and Shino, probably determining that Sasuke no longer posed a threat and that Sakura was capable of dealing with him now. She also noticed the curse retreating up along his arms, returning to the curse mark, to lock itself away until Sasuke summoned its power next, deliberately or not. When there was a substantial dip in her own chakra reserve, Sakura halted the transfer. She couldn't afford to expend all of the chakra Tsunade provided her on one person. This should be plenty for Sasuke anyways, potentially enough for another Chidori. Before Sakura had even removed her hands from Sasuke's torso, he sat up abruptly, and, to her surprise, reached out a hand to cup her face. His skin was rough and caked in dried blood. He forced Sakura to look at him. Her heart pounded against her chest. From their proximity, she could make out the specks of dirt on his forehead, the tiny scratches on his cheeks and neck, the rims around his pupils, and the stray strands of his black hair that flopped over his head protector. His eyebrows were drawn together and he was staring directly into her eyes. "Sakura." He started slowly, and Sakura couldn't guess what he might say next. But then he faltered. Suddenly, Sasuke's stare drifted over her and then he turned his head to the right, his hand slipping from her face. His stare lingered on the mutilated bodies, on all of the people he murdered while under the control of Orochimaru's curse, and when the realization crossed his features, Sakura's heart just about broke. "That wasn't you," she said firmly, reaching out and gripping onto one of his cold hands. But Sasuke didn't seem to hear her. Sakura knew that there wasn't anything she could say to truly mute whatever he was feeling: guilt, grief, fear, or some combination of the three. But she tried again anyways. "Hey," she said, more urgently, while giving his hand a tug. He turned his blank stare back to her. It's not your fault." His eyes softened at the words she borrowed from him and he released a breath. Then he reached his free hand towards her again, past her face this time, and interlaced his fingers through the hair at the base of her neck. He gently, hesitantly, pulled her closer. Sakura read his intentions and boldly wrapped her arms around his shoulders, gripping onto the fabric of his undershirt with her gloved hands, and burying her face in the crook below his jaw. She slumped against Sasuke's body, vulnerable, afraid, and defeated. His arms encircled her, and then it was just their hitched breaths, connected bodies, and their beating Avenger hearts. And they stayed like that for a long while. Sasuke eventually broke the silence. "Have you seen anyone else?" he asked quietly, his breath tickling her ear. Sakura felt his muscles tense a little against her, and her own thoughts flew to Naruto, Ino, Hinata, Neji, and the others whose fates were unknown. "No," she said, while reluctantly pulling away, severing the moment, but feeling a strengthened connection and comfort in having him at her side. "Me neither," he said, while the two of them helped each other to their feet. "Aside from them," he added, nodding in the direction of the others. Sakura followed his gaze and was reminded of Karen's contraction of the disease. "Let's go check," she said, and leading him to the group, their arms strewn securely around each other. When they arrived, Tsunade was still examining Karen, and everyone else was hanging back, careful not to interfere with the medical procedure. But Sakura had no such reservations, so she released Sasuke and crouched down on Karen's other side. She turned to Tsunade and opened her mouth to ask about Karen's prognosis, but Tsunade got to it first. She kept her eyes trained on her patient and her red lips barely moved when she murmured, "She's an unusual case." Sakura's eyes flitted back down and she caught sight of the strange marks lining Karen's body, dotted scabs outlining patches across her skin. Whatever the marks were, they appeared to be interacting with the spreading disease. Karen's eyes were squeezed shut, her face covered in sweat, and she was clearly experiencing immense pain. "This doesn't look good," Sakura muttered, and pursing her lips. "No. It doesn't," Tsunade said. "And not only this." She looked up and met her student's gaze. Sakura was taken aback by the motion at first, and then she paled, because something about the knowing look in Tsunade's eye didn't sit well with her. "Is it any better here?" she whispered,